About to go live.
Forensic quizzing. Oh.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Survivor NSFW Rewind, Professor Tim Watches Borneo. I am your host, Karen Eisenberg, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Professor Tim Wilson. How are you doing today, Tim?
Hello, I'm doing splendidly. I'm fuming with so many exciting things, but I'm hoping some of that energy will come across in a very positive way. Well, we're having such an exciting time in the UK at the moment. It's quite extraordinary.
There's an old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. My mind keeps going to that today.
We do. We are cursed to perdition at the moment, I think. Interesting times, meeting no one.
So, and then let me also bring in our guest for today. This is, I'm very happy, excited to welcome Mario Lanza. Mario is a member of the Survivor Historians podcast and the author of When It Was Worth Playing For, a book about the early seasons of Survivor, and I'm sure many other things that I've forgotten. So, Mario, please introduce yourself to the audience and to explain to Tim why you're here.
Hello, my name is Mario Lanza. People who know Survivor probably know me. I have been writing about the show since the very early days, almost since season 1. I have a book out about the first 3 seasons of the show called When It Was Worth Playing For, as she said. And I've done a podcast called The Survivor Historians. I have a website called The Funny 115, which is probably the most popular Survivor website ever. And I am basically the one Survivor writer out there who has never been affiliated with the show, has never signed a contract. So I'm very blunt and opinionated and honest, and it's fun to talk about the history of the show that way.
Yeah, so I did forget to flag the Funny 115. Tim, this is something, these are, so what Mario does is he takes these little moments in the show, right? Rather than writing about, the big plot points and the things that everybody else is writing about, he will just notice sometimes a little moment, a little turn of phrase, a little, and some of them are bigger than that. And just really drill down into the television product and how it's made and how we react to it. So I'm going to start sending them to you, Tim, for, as we come across, some of these moments in Borneo. I'll send you the links.
I think we've already come across a few of them anyway. And what's extraordinary is some of these things I didn't even notice. You flagged them up. 1 or 2 of them I noticed, and you think, oh no, that's not relevant. I was thinking, well, actually, I'm really, having been in the situation, having been in a reality TV show, I am fascinated by the way that it is produced, and I'm fascinated by seeing the way in which some people go along with the production, some people try to bypass the production, some people try to subvert the production. Really, I mean, unless you go along with the production, I think you're on a highway to hell, because you are not in control of anything, even your own safety and livelihood. You are not. You are literally a product. Unless you go along with it, it's a disaster. And if you think you can win at the expense of the production, you're being very foolish, I think. However, by being good television, you may spark a process where the production will go away from what it thought was going to happen and what therefore it had planned. Because what I find so fascinating is looking at the various reality programs that I've looked at now. Almost all of them have a scriptwriter, and the first thing you think of when you think of reality TV is that there is no scriptwriter. But of course, there is a script. Of course, there is a plot, and because that plot comes from the talent, it doesn't mean it's constructed. Of course, it's constructed. We construct plots every day, and we're not necessarily the best people to edit our own conversations. So to have somebody there who's going to make sure that we actually say the best things. I'm always fascinated by the little expression. What is it now? L'esprit d'escalier, which is the Oscar Wilde thing. It's so exciting because it literally goes back to the French salons, where the French salons were on the we're on the first floor. Is that the second floor in America? Or the first floor? I don't know. It's the one up from the ground floor. So you enter your boulevard house on the ground floor. You go up the flight of stairs, l'escalier, and then you open the door and you go into the salon. And there you're supposed to be ravishingly brilliant and say the most wonderful things and leave everybody with these bon mots. And of course you fail. And you leave, and as you go down the stairs, you think, I wish I'd said that. And of course, if you're Oscar Wilde, the person you say that, oh, you will, Oscar, you will. And l'esprit d'escalier, the spirit of the stairs, dominates our lives. Now, in reality TV, we can say all those brilliant things that we thought we might have said because we just do a retake, or we have a producer say, "Well, didn't you mean that?" Yes, I did. Let's do it again, and suddenly you find you've actually said all those wonderful things that you wish you'd said, or you think about it and you respond again because there's time to do that, and you suddenly find, oh my goodness, in the edit. They've not taken that first rather lame response. They've waited until I've thought about it and said something brilliant. Right. And you come across sounding like sort of, like the best bits of Shakespeare, as if that's what you do all day long.
So Tim, what were your experiences with production with this on the Circle? Because I'm really not so familiar with how it works. I know how it works on other shows. I know that you met with producers once a day. And did they then come in?
I really didn't. I very rarely met with anybody. I met with runners when I was being moved from my apartment to the garden area. And then it would be slightly a one-way conversation, but it was very enjoyable. I love hearing myself talking, and but you can judge a response from the occasional grunt. But they wouldn't know anything. What was interesting was the people who I met were exclusive to me, and yes, there were producers who looked after me, but I didn't really meet them very often at all.
How was then you had the opportunity to kind of go back and talk about what you were doing, like you said, in a slightly more coherent way?
Because text wouldn't appear on the screen very quickly, and then it would appear a little bit late, and occasionally I would have to edit it, and I would have to say, no, you don't spell that Greek word like that, you spell it like this, and of course it wouldn't go up at all because I was being a bit too pompous. And so you got a sense from what we say, the lacuna, the absences, but I felt increasingly cared for and increasingly looked after, and occasionally if I was distressed or the cat was distressed or something, or we looked uncomfortable, we'd get a knock on the door from a psychiatrist or something, and are you all right? And yes, I'm fine. Would you like some cat food? Yes. And would you like another air conditioner? Absolutely, I would. I think I had 12 by the time I finished.
And it was still hot, right? I mean, we've heard some of these stories with what happened in the Circle.
And I remember seeing. I have seen the first 4 episodes or so of my show, and there's air conditioners everywhere in everybody's rooms, but generally only about 1 or 2. In my case, I don't think I saw any air conditioners, but mine were all hidden all over the place. Literally, the place was so noisy with air conditioners, like living in a Ford factory. You would have thought there was some sort of major industry going on day and night. I don't know how that compares to Survivor. I don't know how much interaction you get with Survivor, whether or not it's as I say, in the Circle, it was really these pauses, which were the way that that I judged the edit, and the fact that something wasn't.
Right. So Mario, you can speak to this probably much better than I can about, what the interaction is between survivors and producers and how has it changed?
I don't know so much about the modern show. I know the early days in particular is that the producers are always flitting around and just hanging out. And I know there's segment producers and like people that conduct the confessionals. And one thing is that back in the day, I used to write these stories, these Survivor stories, where I'd kind of fictionalize what I thought Survivor was like behind the scenes. And I'd always have players writing in and telling me, giving me corrections. They're like, well, the producer or the players don't talk to the cameraman. It's the producers doing the interviews. The cameramen are just sitting there. So I would get all sorts of little insider tidbits back then, but I don't know what it's like now. So I'm probably not the best to answer that, but I do know.
But it's
the
still
producers drive it. The producers drive it, not the players.
Yeah, and like you said, and there are these confessionals, and we see that, like you said, much more in later Survivor. But even in these very early episodes, where it's clear that a producer has taken somebody and sat them down on the beach, right, and ask them some, mildly leading questions, right? So that they can get the narration that they need to put the story together.
Yeah. And one thing is that most fans refer to those as confessionals, and they're not confessionals. That's one thing that's always kind of been a nitpick of mine. Those are interviews where the producer asks the question and the player answers. But it's a confessional is something you'd see on the real world, where someone goes into a room with a camera and just starts talking. That's not Survivor.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
I'm sure it's not really. I think I only had one of those, and that was never aired.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the circle, I think there are really no confessionals, but there was an option for that. And I think it might have been a way to sort of push particular angles. In my case, the only time that I was taken off to do a confessional was, I think, after the first blocking. I don't know whether you've seen this show, Mario.
I have not.
There's all these. So we're stuck in little apartments on our own. We can't talk to anybody else. We can only talk to people through a specially designed social media platform. So we're talking to the television all the time. And there's about 8 to 12 cameras, remotely controlled. By the time I finished, I was saying hello to the cameraman or the camera woman, and I'd sort of worked out their names. And so I would say hello, and the camera would then nod to me. I would say, "Oh, are you so-and-so?" He would nod, which I thought was rather nice. But if I could work out who people were who I couldn't see in other apartments, it wasn't beyond me to work out who was controlling the camera. So I found that very, very, very entertaining, but there was very little manipulation. But as I say, the one bit was after my first blocking. There was a girl who I blocked, and she was claiming to be straight when in fact she was gay, and I thought that that this was quite so inappropriate behaviour. It got me quite irritated, and I thought, well, why am I so irritated? And I realised I'd never actually sort of publicly made a great statement about being gay. I'd always my line, which I gave out in the show, was, well, I just assume people are going to look at the colour of my socks and draw their own conclusions. Today they're orange. So I've never sort of denied anything, but I never made a great issue about it because I don't feel that sort of defines me. But sort of changing that would define me. And this sort of disembodied voice came out and said, "Go to you're going to go to this room." And then I was guided out of my room, blindfolded and muffed, and taken off to a room where there was a camera, and I sat down in front of a camera and asked why I was concerned about this girl's blocking, and I explained my own position. Now, in the end, as I say, it wasn't used, and in the end, it sort of emerged in conversation with 2 of the other girls, and I was talking about my partner, and then I found, I just thought I have to stop avoiding pronouns, and I used the word he, and then said, "Oh, we thought so," and I thought, well, it's not a state secret, but but in fact, it has got me into a certain amount of trouble because since I came out of the circle, there's a law in Moscow which has been ramped up rather egregiously, and it's a pernicious law, really. And I met one of the people who's been very keen on ramping it up, a rather foul man who looks a little bit like a toad. He's called Pyotr Tolstoy, and he's related embarrassingly, to the real and celebrated novelist. And Mr. Tolstoy is just an abhorrent excuse for humanity. And he started he started his nastiness a few years ago when he decided he was going to wage campaign against Jews, and claimed that Jewish people were desecrating Orthodox churches. Complete rubbish. But he was believed because he was in the Duma. And then after that, he started off on sort of ramping up this law against or a law in favor of promoting a conventional family lifestyle. And there was a boy called Maxim who was interviewed on YouTube, and it was quite an innocuous interview. And suddenly he found himself facing. He was interviewed by small children. What's it like being gay?
So in your case, I mean, because you've been living with your partner for many years. But
I've been living with my partner since the beginning of the century, and indeed my partner was a victim of really quite serious abuse in Greece, and I took Greece to court and won for this, and I'm not.
Right. My point is, if
violent.
Right. If they had really wanted to investigate you, they could have, but they didn't.
Yeah.
But then when you were on television, right, then I guess that was some. But even then, it's British TV in Russia. I guess somehow they found out about it.
Yeah, but nevertheless, you're sort of on television. You put in my name into the internet, and it would be difficult, I think, for me to go back and be involved in. As a professor in Russia, I was very much involved in preparing teachers for teaching, and at all levels of academic education, primary school, secondary school, university.
Right.
So I was doing bits of serious academic work, but and I got to think. I was thinking about this today. What am I now? I've been an animator, I've been a politician, I've been a teacher, and now I have to realize, really, I'm a sort of entertainer, and so of course I do a little bit of teaching, and I do a little bit of animating, and I do a little bit of politics, but really, it's all through the prism of pure entertainment. It's showtime, folks.
Right. And there's an argument that even before you went on a reality TV show, that was in fact what you were doing, even though you may not have looked at it in that way.
I did. I did. Anybody who came to my lectures knew they were in for a performance. Except for me. There was one dreadful occasion when I'd had rather a lot of vodka at lunch, and I sent myself to sleep with a philosophy lesson, and I literally fell asleep. I was clearly so boring, and in those days I used to lecture sitting down, which I thought was very grand, but I never do that now.
Because you're less likely to fall asleep teaching if you're standing up.
Well, I'm sort of bombing around like some sort of mad fly, like Batman, because I tend to wear my gown. I quite like my gown. It makes me feel like a cross between Dumbledore and something from Tim Burton.
You would make a wonderful Dumbledore, Tim.
What?
I said you'd make a wonderful Dumbledore.
Yeah, well, yes, indeed. I'd love to be Dumbledore. One of the few characters in Harry Potter that I quite like. And he's a character who seems to develop a little bit. He's got some hinterland, and whereas so many of the characters in Harry Potter are ciphers, and they. Without really admitting it. Whereas when you look at Tolkien, you have got cipher characters that never really develop. But he's not writing a novel; he's writing a saga. And
Tim, I think we might be, some of our viewers who haven't read a lot of Tolstoy are probably kind of wondering when we're going to talk about Survivor.
I'm so sorry.
So yes, no, I mean, I'm happy. Let's talk Tolstoy after the show. I'm sure it would be fascinating.
That meant I was talking about Tolkien rather than Tolstoy. Maybe
Tolstoy. Start with Tolstoy now. It's Tolkien.
They all begin with T. And
as you know, I'm not going anywhere. Right, I am on day 700 of this quarantine that never ends. So afterwards, but in the meantime, let's try to Let's go back to, or go forward to, episode 3 of Borneo. So if you remember, right, in the end of the last episode, we said goodbye to BB, right? And we talked about that and his ability to fit in with the younger crowd. So when we come back to Tagipola, the first thing we see with both tribes is that they are really feeling the lack of food, right? And so they're going out to hunt for tapioca and pagong.
That's right.
So tapioca. You said
tapioca.
It wrong. Tapioca.
Tapioca. Yeah. Right. Oh, that's...
And tapioca really exists.
Right. The tapioca, I mean, I know it exists. It's a thing. I know tapioca pudding exists. But is that something that I guess in that area that they really eat as a staple starch?
Yeah,
Tim, I'm asking you as if you would know this because you know everything.
Well, I have had tapioca pudding, and it looked disgusting when I was a child, and I'm sure it still looks disgusting. And you know, to think that it comes from some sort of roots doesn't endear it to me in any way.
But Mario, so that tapioca, that's your Sue impression, I assume. I do not do impressions.
Yeah, she's got that strong Wisconsin accent. That tapioca.
Flat.
Tapioca. Yeah. I have been out there and I've seen Richard looking for tapioca.
Yeah, it sounds like it's the same. It's the same thing with Sarah. You know, on this most recent season,
very
phenomenal.
Similar, yeah.
Right, you need those flat vowels.
Yeah, that's Sue. Sue is very fun to imitate.
Yeah, yeah. But they go out, they look. Well, they don't find the tapioca, right? But they find a mud volcano. And I think we talked about this. We talked about this a little bit last time. That
we didn't mention the mud volcano last time.
No. But we did speak about this kind of difference between the two tribes. That it seems, or at least the way it's portrayed, is that Tagi is kind of the adults, and Pagong, you know, are the kids who were there to party.
Pagong is the fun tribe.
Yes,
that's the one the audience likes.
Right.
And it's Pagong who find the mud bubbles, isn't it? And then they have a mud bubble bath, which just looked utterly disgusting.
Yeah.
Really, I just thought at that moment I felt 50-something or other. Practically.
You become BB. That's where you become BB. You're disapproving of these youngins on the Pagongs.
Yeah. No.
So wait. In the last episode, who went out in the last episode? It wasn't BB who went out.
It was BB. It was BB.
Episode 2.
Was it BB?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm getting slightly confused here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. My notes are all slightly confused at this point. But okay, let's go on.
But do you think, Mario? Do you have, again, based on what you've heard or just what you're thinking? Do you think that they knew that, were they really trying to have these two tribes be so different, and they thought that Pagong was going to be the popular tribe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was 100% because Pagong has all the big personalities and Tagi has all the ones that are very businesslike and, you know, it's business. This is just, we're here to get the job done. So I think they 100% intended for Pagong to be the fan favorites, and they were the huge fan favorites.
So in terms of production, this was effectively a put up job, wasn't it?
Yeah. Explain that term and I'll
well, so the producers knew who they were dealing with. Everybody is produced. Everybody is interviewed and interviewed and interviewed. So people in production know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
They have a pretty good idea about how you're going to respond. So they know who's going to be the good time people, and they know who's going to be the sort of hard workers and so on. And it seems to me that putting BB among the Pagong tribe was a recipe for disaster, and also potentially a recipe for very good television. So either it was going to work, or he was going to go off. And in reality, I think he hated it so much he just wanted to go.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, 100%. BB was cast, I think, for one reason. They wanted to embarrass this guy. They knew he was set in his ways. He was rich. He would never yield on anything. He was one of the richest players that has ever been on Survivor. I don't think people realize how rich.
But I think if he'd been in the other tribe, I think he might have survived a few more days.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they cast BB to fail. They knew, like, more thought was put into this first season than any other Survivor season or any other reality TV season ever. How much time they spent interviewing these people, doing psychological profiles. And I guarantee they knew BB was going to flop real hard, and they wanted to throw him with a bunch of slacker kids just to see what would happen.
Right. But so, Mario, you're saying this as if this doesn't happen every season. Because I would argue that they continue to do this.
Of course. Right? I mean, they cast for conflict. That's one thing Survivor fans need to understand, that the entire point of the show is the producers are going to set it up where people will conflict. That's just good TV.
See, this I would say is the big difference between all the shows that I've been shown and The Circle. Because The Circle, to me, was not cast for conflict. It was cast for friendship and to forge friendship and to forge and to create a sense of reciprocity. Though in later in editions outside the UK, it has been cast for conflict, and conflict has developed, and that sense of reciprocity was really absent.
Yeah, no, I don't think that Tim is completely wrong about this, Mario, and it's interesting because they have now done seasons of The Circle in the UK, the US, Brazil, and France.
Yeah,
and it definitely is true that the way that they cast it, and I see, and the way that they're, I guess it's all part of the same package, right? Who you cast and how, and in what order you bring them in, because the way it works in this game, not everybody is in the season from the beginning. So so as they introduce people as the show goes on, I'm assuming that they also have some flexibility in terms of who they introduce based on what's going on.
There seems to be a huge number of people who are waiting in the wings, and I think depending on who is blocked, extraordinary word. I mean, it just
that's the word that they use for eliminating.
I always assumed the word blocked was something that you went off and took Dulcolax for, my thought is if ever The Circle wants to find a sponsor, that's where they go. The Circle, you'll never be blocked with Dulcolax.
I guess my mind went more to Legos, but
I'm with Tim. Always go for the constipation joke. Always.
My mind naturally sinks to the lowest common denominator. But it's What was extraordinary in my series of The Circle, and in fact in the previous series of The Circle, is there were 4 or 5 people who were phenomenally interested in this sort of friendship thing, and one of them was the person who was oddly cast as the enemy, as the villain, and he had a really tough time. And I think the fellow who won last year, who was also catfishing. Who is the most gregarious and kind and sweet man, equally found it really tough lying to that degree. And I think both of those, oddly, they were sort of they were pulled to the dark side, and it wasn't a place that they found was a natural home. And in contrast, when I looked at the American Circle and the French Circle, and particularly the Brazilian Circle, it seemed to me obvious that there were people who were equipped to deal with that and were competitive, and that sort of competitive edge was to the fore, whereas it wasn't to the fore. In fact, I hardly realized I was in a competition, and I think Woody and Ella certainly had the same sense. We were just in it to try and be as friendly as possible. And I don't notice that at all. We're now up to episode 3, and I haven't noticed any real friendships forming. All I've noticed is political alliances. Now I've seen all that.
We've seen a bit. We've seen Rich and Rudy, right, and we've seen Greg and Colleen.
And we've seen Greg and Colleen. But I just thought, even that we didn't dwell on Greg and Colleen. We just thought it was rather silly them going off for so long and leaving the group. Whereas in a show which is exploring the reality of how people get on with one another, am I allowed to say, "Oh, get off"? I probably can't, because it has a different meaning.
Get on, Tim, not get off. Yeah. Get off.
I can't say that. I can't say that. In Britain, it's quite an innocuous meaning. In the States, I think it is quite naughty. I think.
I mean, if it could apply to a Greg and Colleen, we don't know.
Yeah. They deny it, but
So they didn't get off with one another, but yes, I would have liked to have seen the cameras go there and see their conversation. That's where that would have been for me their conversation. That bit for me would have been the interesting part of episode 2, And the part of episode 3 would have been the debate about those people who were hesitating about the mud bath. But we didn't get any of that. We got mud bath straight in. You know, it was like the hippopotamus song.
Well, I guess I'll tell you, as somebody who has done, so I also would have had the same reaction, and I did, you know, the first time I ever saw Survivor, because, you know, oh, mud, what's the point? But actually, it really can be, if it is one of these thermal mud baths. Again, I've done this at the Dead Sea. It really is quite soothing, and it's great for your skin.
Well, part of it was just fun. I mean, they had no fun with BB being there for 6 days.
Yeah, and they've got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Right. So of course they're going to play.
But they should have something else to do, because they've still got, what, 14 other people to get to know. And they just don't. They just seem so self-centered and so fixated on winning this prize, which is just a bit of money. You know, what we want to see is this interaction, not constant bashing each other and trying to deceive each other. Or simply having fun in the mud. I mean, you know, I could go to a primary school and see that.
Well, that's basically Pagong. So there you go. It fits perfectly.
Mario, well done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I do think that they were not nearly as focused on, I mean, in terms of who was focused on the prize, I mean, we see almost from the beginning, right? Rich says in the first episode, right? The check is written, right? But certainly everything we've seen from Pagong, with the exception of, you know, well, BB wasn't really there to win either. Maybe Gretchen was. But the rest of Pagong, no, like I said, they were there for the experience, right? They were there to have fun.
Really thought when he,
I was going to say, I think you're really generalizing, Karen, because we only see like 0.2% of the footage. And that's something that's
always true.
Something that has really dogged the Pagongs for years. Survivor fans have always said, oh, they didn't care. They had no interest. But that's not true at all.
I also think that when you look at BB in that opening sequence, when he's helping to get the raft onto the onto the island, he's dynamic, and all that dynamism is sort of shot to pieces in really by the middle of episode 2, and he's in a state of collapse by the end of episode 2. Yeah. He needs a hug, and there's nobody there, nobody there at all to perk him up a little. He's made enemies
the only
with
one
him.
Who will talk to him.
Nobody's tried to be his friend.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be an objective.
Well, that's the thing, and I like pointing this out all the time, is that Survivor is a horrible game, really, in that the whole point of the early game is to find the outsider and make sure it's not you. So the minute BB doesn't fit in, they're all backing away from him as fast as they can, just because they know they at least will last 3 days.
Yes, you see, my first thought when I was telephoned about being on the circle, my first thought that a game which is based on deceit cannot be nice. And I had a look at the first series, and I thought, actually, this is by far the nicest reality TV show that I've ever heard of. Or all the snippets of reality TV shows that I've seen. This is by far the nicest. Actually, I watched the whole lot. You know, I would contrast that with Love Island, which I found detestable.
Even I don't watch Love Island, Tim.
Oh, it was just grotesque. There was a lovely fellow called Ollie, and he was out within a few minutes, and there was a big crisis about what he was doing in the UK, and he was pilloried in the press. But what was fascinating there was, I gather, all the conversations which I would have found interesting were held off camera, and all the conversations which were as dull as ditch water about who was going to, in British terminology, get off with whom, that is, kiss them, nothing more, was played endlessly, and so we couldn't hear the conversations about football and about sort of how people might go off and milk a cow. All we could hear was this dullness. What we want is a breadth of humanity. Now, I thought a show which was about deceit would equally avoid reality, but in fact, it seemed to me to be getting to grips with reality, because basically we are all deceitful, so we might as well just take that.
Right.
and get on with it. And I find, I've now got to episode 3, and although it's very diverting, and I'm finding it sort of fascinating, I don't feel I'm getting to see real characters. I'm still seeing ciphers, and I thank the producers for the little name kick every moment, because I would forget it.
And it will get easier. I mean, there's still 14 people left in the game. I mean, as it goes on, you will get to know.
Will they have more interaction with one another?
Oh, yes.
I have a question. Is this the first Survivor season you've ever watched?
Yes.
It's pretty well the first reality show I've ever watched.
Okay. And you have no idea? Yeah. You have no idea what happens in Borneo? I don't want to spoil if you don't know.
No, there's no idea.
No, I have no idea. And I've been terribly obedient. I was told not to advance beyond the episode that I'm discussing.
Okay, I'll be very careful, because I've seen this season 100 times. I mean, so I'll accidentally throw out information.
Restrain your natural enthusiasm, Mario. If you start to stray, I will sing Mario Lanza songs to you.
Oh, thank you. All right, thank you. That will stop me. But what I wanted to say is that the first season of Survivor, the characters the most out of any Survivor season. After the first season, it really starts dropping off. But as the season goes along, it will start to feel more like a documentary, like you're just hanging out with them on the beach and they're talking. So stick with the season. This is the one season that will give you what you want.
Yeah, that is surely what we're looking for, isn't it?
Yes, that's the thing. That's the premise.
Yeah. So why do you think that's been? The production has avoided that in later seasons, and managed that by sort of accident in this season.
Well, they put a lot of work into that first season, and the first season is different. Into the casting, the production, the music, the cues, the editing. The first season is so much different than any other Survivor season, and I always say it's because the first season feels more like a documentary, and after the first season, it becomes a reality show, because it's much more polished starting in the second season. The first one is very raw at times.
And were there reality shows before Survivor?
Yes, there were. There was The Real World on MTV. That was a big one. That had been going on for about 6-7 years. There was the Road Rules. There's a show called Cops, where they just follow cops around and show them arresting people and stuff. This was the first one on network TV, and this was the first really big competition show. So it was a kind of a groundbreaking show, although with the asterisk being Survivor had been on in Sweden under the name Expedition Robinson for a couple years. So it wasn't entirely new, but it was new to this level of audience, this size of an audience.
But one distinction of reality TV is that it needs to have this element of competition. So the police show arguably is not really reality TV. Although
it's a different kind of. It's not competitive. There are different genres within the genre of reality TV.
Right, I see.
So I would argue something like Cops. Right.
Yeah. Real World and Road Rules would be the closest thing, but they weren't necessarily competition. It was people, strangers thrown together, living together. The producers would dream up some conflict. They'd have to discuss it. It was basically, you want to see natural human behavior. And so that's really what's going on with Survivor here in the first season. They're trying to do that, but in a competitive, horribly unethical game that's really a nasty game. And I don't think a lot of the audience saw that at first, because they think it's...
Natural human behavior would involve people throwing themselves into mud.
Yeah. I mean, for young American people like the Pagongs, they were all young college students. That's what they do. I'm sorry. I don't know if you've been in America among college students recently, but that is probably what they would do.
I've had your American college students over here, and I'm sure if we had mud baths, they'd be into them.
That's your big problem. You just don't have enough mud baths over there.
I'm surprised you haven't run into it in Russia, because that seems to be more of their culture.
Oh, I think I probably have. I think I probably have. Yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Have you not seen all the people in spring or on Memorial Day right now in America going to the packed beaches and all the lakes? That's exactly what we do. We cram as many people into small bodies of water as possible.
Right. And sometimes we smear them in mud first.
Along with COVID-19.
Yes.
It's
what we
important
do.
To make.
We're number one.
It's important to make space for one's friends.
All right. So
it is so disturbing. It's it is disturbing. But we're much the same over here. we are a single global unit with all our failings.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't we love ourselves?
To be fair, Tim, I do not believe you're the prototypical person who's going to be throwing yourself into a mud volcano. So I'm not sure you're the intended audience for this scene.
I would.
Yeah, you probably want to keep the three-piece suits out of the mud.
By the end of episode 3, I was thinking I could manage this, but I would have to be properly clothed.
You'd be a target.
And I was thinking, well, I was thinking back to my Robinson Crusoe, and Robinson Crusoe does behave a little bit like a gentleman, just in a desert setting. And I think, or Gulliver. I think it would be quite nice to approach Survivor rather like an 18th century literary hero.
I don't know if most of the players would take that approach.
Right. That's what Tim would do.
And that's what I would do. At the moment, I'm reading Paradise Lost. So the figure of Satan falling down into a desert of flaming misery is floating around in my mind. Better to rule in heaven than serve in. Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. So would I be able to make my desert island into a sort of heaven? I don't know.
I don't know if the Pagongs. Yeah, I don't know if the Pagongs were having those types of conversations about Milton.
Right.
Yeah, well, they hadn't done proper building. You know, they're not prepared the groundwork. You can't have fun until you've done the work.
Well, and I think that's the decision. That's the contrast between Tagi and Pagong, and between the younger people and the older people. Right.
And also, I felt both camps were a little bit sort of chaotic, and so although the Pagong was slightly worse, the Tagi were not much better. I mean, and again, I think the editing was very kind to the Tagus.
Right. Well, why do you say that, Tim?
They were trying to push this contrast. I don't think that contrast was really warranted. I think I think both groups were trying to get used to the fact that they were living in a sort of non-civilized environment, with civilization just beyond the beach, with the production crew.
And there's one variable.
I think that.
Go ahead. I said there's one variable you're overlooking, is that, again, this is a strategy game where people are being voted off. And the number one thing that gets you voted off in the early days is for being bossy. So it's very hard to have a leader when you don't want to be the leader. Being a leader will immediately get you targeted and get you voted out. And that's something you can see that on Tagi and Pagong, that they probably do have leadership, but they're being very careful not to be the one who's being BB, because BB gets you voted off, and they don't want that to happen.
Well, there's BB on the one hand, and then there's Richard and Rudy on the other hand.
Right.
And Richard and Rudy, because I think they're so focused on one another, they both managed to survive this. Whereas BB had nobody to focus on, except for possibly Gretchen, and that just comes across as sort of aggressive and sort of, you know, there's no point in going there.
Right. But I do think the difference is that Rudy, and again, we don't know what all the conversations that might have happened, but the way that we're shown it, Rudy kind of instantly gets the idea of there's more of us, of them than there are of me. I need to fit in. Whereas with BB and Gretchen is, you know, BB is not having any of these epiphanies, and Gretchen is saying to him, you know, you are ruining your relationships with these kids. And even with that direction, which he very much needed, he just was not hearing of it. Right? He was just completely dismissive.
Yeah. And one thing that has to be pointed out as well is that Richard and Rudy both get very lucky in that Sonia was such a liability, the old woman on Tagi. BB did not have that. So Rudy and Richard easily could have been BB, just had Sonia not been there. She was an easy first vote, and they really got lucky that she was there.
If BB had decided he didn't want to go out, do you think he could have survived?
No way, not with that group. There's no way he ever gets any headway with that group with a bunch of young people.
Right.
Yeah.
So then the next thing that we see, and Tim, we did discuss this a bit earlier, but it's coming back again with Dirk and Kelly, right? And Dirk is reading the Bible again.
Dirk is one of my favorite people. I thought he was going to be last time. I've warmed to him as a sort of beautiful odd person. What I've got here is two issues which I've clearly confused in my writing, but they must have occurred at about the same time. Dirk dash Bible and Virgin dash disturbing homophobic stuff. So I think Dirk definitely isn't. Is Dirk responsible for the homophobia? I don't think he is particularly, but I
don't think he is.
But it all sort of emerges. It all sort of emerges in a 5 minute sort of woof, and you've got all this stuff with Rudy, with Rudy's analysis of Richard, and at the same time you've got Dirk and his Bible reading,
right?
And I think these two things are placed together for that sort of.
Oh, of course. I mean, it wasn't just that they cast somebody, and Mario, please feel free to jump in because you know this stuff so much better than I do. But my feeling on it was that, obviously they wanted the Bible believing Christian, but they also made sure to get one that, Dirk says, I'm not afraid to share my testimony, right? Which means, he was cast also for conflict.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the issue is necessarily being religious. I mean, obviously there will be people on some of these shows who just are anti-religious. And so if you indicate in any way that can happen. But I think this is a specific situation where they needed somebody who was beyond not just being willing to share his testimony, but kind of have him see this as his purpose on the show.
Yeah, Dirk is a very specific casting choice. And I'm glad Tim pointed him out because I love Dirk. I find Dirk very interesting.
He's wonderful.
The history behind Dirk is they loved him because he's from the middle of Wisconsin. He's a dairy farmer. He is not very worldly. He's very biblical, very loves to share his testimony, very religious, very old school. But he was a college basketball player, which I found fascinating, is that they plucked him out of his dairy farm. They threw him into a college in Seattle, which was him and just a bunch of African Americans. It was like he was the only white kid on the team. And so he was this really religious, biblical dairy farmer who talked like a rap star, who talked hip hop because that was his only peer group, his basketball players. So Dirk has a really unique background where he doesn't blend. He doesn't have most of the worldview that everyone else on the show has. So they loved him because he was different.
Right, but they didn't really show us so much of the basketball, hip hop. I've heard other people say also that basically Dirk and Jervis were actually very, very similar.
Yeah, exactly.
But we didn't see that side of Dirk on the show.
Correct. That's why the first season of Survivor is so much more interesting what you don't see on the show than what you do, because a lot of it was documented. There's books out there. Mark Burnett wrote a book about the casting, the history. It's like the most documented reality show that's ever existed. But yeah, the stuff with Richard, I will say, is interesting because Dirk is not like, he doesn't flat out say he doesn't like gay people. He will listen to Richard, but in a later season, they would make fun of Dirk more. They don't make fun of Dirk on the show. It's very interesting how they present it from his side as well. They show Richard and him butting heads, but they're not saying one is clearly better than the other one.
Well, I mean, they did show Sue. I feel like Sue and Kelly did get the better of that conversation.
Yeah.
Perhaps, that the whole thing that, the discussion about the fact that he's a virgin. And Kelly says, he's sexually frustrated. And then, Dirk says, I've gone 23 years without sex. You could try it for 7 weeks. And then Sue's conversation is, maybe you should try it sometime. You might like it, So I do feel like that we were kind of asked to put ourselves in Sue's shoes more than Dirk's. Although I guess, but in the whole.
Why do you think that, Karen?
What do you mean exactly?
Why do you think the bias is towards Sue rather than?
And maybe I could be wrong, because I'm sure that the religious people who did watch the show probably saw themselves very much in Dirk. And this is what we talked about also in the past that Dr. Mark Burnett has said, and this is true with any TV show, right? You want to cast it in such a way that the audience will feel connected to the cast. But in this particular season specifically, Mark Burnett was hell-bent on having that every American should be able to see themselves in at least one of these characters. But I don't know. And maybe this is just, again, my feeling, my knee-jerk reaction. So maybe I'm wrong about this. But I felt that we were being asked to agree with Sue here.
Yeah, I can answer Tim's question for him. Is that the audience would side with Kelly and Sue, so that was why you would see it from their perspective. But again, if you know the history of Survivor, you're just watching the first season, so you're coming in at it fresh. It looks like maybe it's skewed to see Kelly and Sue's position a little more than Dirk's. If you were to go a couple seasons in the future, all they would do with Dirk is they'd say, "Oh, I'm religious. I don't like gay people," and they'd play some stupid dork, some stinger music, doing, and they'd make him look silly and they'd embarrass him. This is the only season they actually don't try to humiliate him just to make a point on the show. They actually give Dirk to say.
Right. I don't really understand this aim to humiliate people with sort of cheap television tricks.
Just wait. Watch more Survivor. It gets way worse.
Well, it gets much worse. I'm fascinated, and I'm of course very keen to see this.
Just wait.
I would hate to be a victim myself.
Right.
I agree with you. I think it's very unfair, and this is one thing I have argued about for years. I don't like that Survivor turned trashy. It eventually turned trashy. It's not in the first season. The first season, they're really trying to be very respectable, and they're really treating their players with respect. Now, we'll get to the Stacey incident in a second, but that is not the case in later seasons.
Do you think the same sort of abuse is inherent in a program like Big Brother?
I have never seen Big Brother, but I have heard it's even more trashy than Survivor. So
much more so.
Yeah,
much more so.
Right, because they've got nothing to do.
They've got nothing.
Whereas these people have got to survive.
Yeah, it's the way I describe
is it possible? Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, please first.
Okay, the way I describe it is that Survivor is not about the players. Survivor is about the TV show, and to make up the TV show, they need characters. So the experience is not about the players. It never has been about the players. The game itself is almost irrelevant. The game itself just provides footage that then they can take footage and make a TV show out of. And this is something that a lot of players have a problem with, which I know already from your comments today, that you were not quite prepared going into reality TV what it really is and what it does to the people. But it is not about the people, and it has never been about the people. And that's just, something you need to realize the more you watch this stuff.
Yeah, you see, it seems to me. So if we go back to our Big Brother thing, because I've only seen a small amount of Big Brother, and then I think it was Celebrity Big Brother and a politician licking milk out of a cat's or something. I think that was the high point of his political career, actually. And would that I had been the cat. I would.
Now who's getting off?
Sorry, no. He made his way across to Russian TV after that. No. What was I going to say? Is people in real life can be quite nasty. So there is room for nastiness to be exposed. But it seems to me that reality TV, the nastiness is potentially in the production, not in the talent.
And it can be both. They will also cast people. They will also cast people as things go on, right? That they're looking, like you said, when they're casting for conflict, that means you need good guys and bad guys, right? So that they will cast certain people who go in, they know that they're a villain, production knows that they're a villain, right? And it makes their job easier. But
it's a really hard, well, I don't know whether that's so, because the people who I've met and spoken to who found themselves cast as villains have had a tough time because nobody wants to be that character.
Well, it depends. Again, we are on the network of Johnny Fairplay, and Johnny Fairplay definitely wanted that character. Some people do embrace.
Johnny is the person who controls.
Johnny is the person who's.
I have to meet Johnny because
we have to arrange it.
I haven't seen his season and I haven't met him. Yes. I just feel his spirit, and that seems very all pervasively friendly and pleasant. Is it not?
You've got a TV persona. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, Johnny's TV persona, especially back then, was very much the villain, right? And he embraced villainy.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness!
I'll tell you. When he went on the show, John was on the 7th season, and in his preseason interview, they said, "Why are you on Survivor?" He said, "I'm going to rape reality TV." That was his agenda for going on the show. He wanted to ruin reality TV forever.
I don't think that's necessarily. I shouldn't say anything there, should I? I'm going to keep mum on that one. But I must say, you know, I just wonder whether reality TV is a good thing, because it can be so easily distorted into so that people can think that what they see is reality. It's not reality. It's actually quite quite far removed from reality.
And I think that now
we're having a conversation that people were having all over the world in 2000 when Survivor came out. There were psychologists talking about this. There was doctors. There was all sorts of people saying, "Is this a good thing?"
Would Johnny take the same view that I'm taking? We've got to get Johnny onto your next show. I have to talk to him as soon as possible. But would Johnny take the view that I've just taken, that reality TV is a very dodgy sort of construct?
He is one of the few people who I think approach reality TV in the correct perspective. He's one of the few that I think actually walked into this from a healthy perspective, saying, "I'm going to play a character. I will give them a character I want, and that's all they're going to get from me." And they. And like, I really think he approached it well. Now, I don't know if it affected his life afterwards. I don't know any of that, but I love the way he approached Survivor. I wish more players would do that.
And I think the difference also, Tim, is that Johnny was already an entertainer. He was a professional wrestler, right? And, you know, when we're talking about American professional wrestling, not wrestling like you see in the Olympics, which is undoubtedly a sport, and, you know, and not rigged and all of that.
But I met one of your professional wrestlers as a result of my time on TV, and we've had some very entertaining conversations.
Who did you meet?
I can't remember his name now. This is very embarrassing, but I hope it wasn't Johnny. But I warmed to this person enormously, and we talked about the element of entertainment involved.
Right. But that was the point, was that Johnny, being an entertainer, understood what they wanted from him, and he gave it to them in spades.
But I also understood that there was an element of entertainment in the show, and that they didn't want Tim Wilson. They wanted the Tim Wilson that they had seen, or the Tim Wilson that they were projecting. So there's just one aspect of me, and very much through a prism. And as long as I saw that prism, as long as I could imagine what was being broadcast, I was safe. And I knew it was possible to sort of fill the screen and to do things and to be that character. But it's not quite me. It's not me.
Right. Well, and again, I think all of those who watch these shows, and Tim, again, like I said, these are the things that you are discovering, that those of us who've been watching these shows for 20 years know, which is, right, you see someone on your TV and you think you know them. And like you said, in certain ways you do know them. But in many, but you don't. You don't.
What I find so fascinating is those people who don't get this idea find themselves in the George Galloway position in Big Brother, faced with the experience of having to sort of completely mock themselves by drinking a bowl of cat milk. And all praise to the producers, because he was obviously somebody who well deserved a bowl of cat milk. But because he didn't give them anything else, that's what he ended up having to do. You know, if really with almost all these characters, there's enough in the characters themselves that they're not actually, they don't need to be humiliated in order to make good television. There's already characters developing. What isn't developing here is a development of relationship, and therefore more interesting character, because character emerges because of the relationship. What his character emerges because of the conflict.
And to be fair, I think the first 2 episodes of Borneo are the weakest. I don't think they're especially strong. The season gets much more deep and well thought out, and there's much more relationship building as it goes along. So stick with it.
I found episode 3 the most boring so far.
There isn't a lot. There's a few things we have to touch on, but there's not so much here.
So much of it was involved in a mud bath, which I suspect was a bikini moment gone wrong, and just boring. I remember, I don't know whether you know anything about a wonderful program called Doctor Who, But I remember back in the day, there was this wonderful character who played Doctor Who called John Pertwee, and the seasons the seasons were split into, I think, four stories over a season, and one story always had one episode too many, and in one episode, literally, the character's speeding around in his little car for about half an hour just to fill up the episode, and I felt that the hot mud bath was speeding around in the little yellow car just to fill up the episode. It did nothing. It did nothing for me. I was bored out of my mind. I had to keep waking up. And
it really didn't last for half an hour, but I understand it felt that way to you.
It felt like much, much longer to me.
All right. So they finally get out of the mud. They finally get out of the mud.
I'm so relieved. I'm so relieved. You know, do you know Flanders and Swan? The hippopotamus song. Mud, mud, glorious mud, nothing quite like it for cooling the blood. Then follow me, follow, down to the hollow, and there let us wallow in mud, glorious mud.
So they get this tree mail, right? And I did not write down, unfortunately, the name of this challenge, but they make it clear that they're going to have to do something. What?
Yes, the tire challenge, and then we got 2 challenges in one. Yeah, go on.
Well, we got two different challenges in this episode, right? But the first one is this one is just a reward challenge, right? We talked about that sometimes they'll be together. It's just a reward challenge, and they know that there's something that it's going to be in the water, right? And you have to be able to dive down. And Jervis is concerned because he says, "I'm not good in the water." So we don't really have to spend too much time on this unless one of you wants to. But but Toddy wins just by a bit. Yeah, I'm sorry, Tim. What were you going to say?
I was fascinated by nomenclature here. I need to come over. Once COVID is out of the way. I need to come over and Americanize myself. You know, Julie Andrews' second film was the Americanization of Emily. I feel a little bit of. I need the Americanization of Tim. Mario, you need to take me in hand. And,
I will take you to a mud bath.
Yes.
As long as I can wear an Edwardian bathing costume.
And then we'll take him to Hearts of Reality and see if we can start a riot.
Yep, we'll go find some tapioca.
Yeah.
Isn't there a tapioca pit in Raggedy Ann? A tapioca monster, I think, or something. Anyway, look, what I found so disturbing about this was all this talk about an inner tube. I thought, what is an inner tube? And then I realized it's fire. And I don't know whether we talk about inner tubes. And then this orange thing appeared, and I thought, oh yes, right. It's sort of blow up thing.
So but Mario, what did you think? I was very.
With a blow up.
But if you saw this to Jervis, right, the way they dealt with the fact that Jervis can't swim is they did. Like they gave him
a life vest.
Basically a floating joint, right, which they would never ever do. Right,
I got that.
In the show now.
Wait a minute. They did that in Marquesas as well. That is it has moved away from that because they don't allow the contestants to swim as much now. But in the first season, they give them a float toy, which
I don't understand how in a program called Survival you would have people who can't swim. It would sort of be.
It still happens, and I can't understand it.
Yeah, it's because they want people from around the country. They want to, appeal to the biggest breadth of audiences they can. And a lot of in inner city places, especially young black kids, don't grow up with swimming pools or lakes or any place they can swim. So it's kind of a cliche. You'll get that on Survivor over the years that the black contestants often can't swim because they grew up in the hood. And so that's specifically, I think, one of the reasons they wanted Jervis.
Can I push this one stage further?
Okay.
Has Survivor ever managed people who are disabled as contestants?
Well, they've cast people with one leg, like a triathlete who has a mechanical leg, but that's as far as they'll go generally.
And they cast a woman now who was not completely deaf, but largely deaf. But generally, right, on a show like this, and that's one of the differences with The Circle, is that in The Circle you can have people with all different sorts of disabilities, and they have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely, and grandly so. But if you want to represent all of America, I'm not sure all of what you got in this program was an all of America with quite a bias towards one particular towards a youthful and quite white cross section of America.
Well, I mean, America is quite white. It was pretty accurate. Yeah,
right.
And religiously, I think it seems to be fairly sort of Anglo-Saxon in its in its concept. I don't see a big Muslim aspect or Jewish aspect.
They've had a few, but not very many. And again, because, well, if you are an observant Jew or Muslim, it's very difficult for you to do a show like Survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, I'd have to go back to my Rambam to see whether or not I could eat worms. But
I can't.
There would be the occasional locust, I think, that could be eaten. But
there are certain locusts. Right.
I would say the one thing about the U.S. is that the big chunk in the middle of the country is just white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. You don't tend to see that in entertainment, but that is what America is. So this show is largely representative of what the U.S. looks like.
And I would argue again in the last 20 years, because Survivor has gotten more diverse, but again, that could also be because America has gotten more diverse.
Yeah.
Yes.
But one thing you mentioned is that this show is skewed towards young and athletic. There is a minimal athletic requirement to be able to participate in the show. That's why it's different than Big Brother. In fact, the one thing I didn't mention earlier is there was a show Mark Burnett had before this. It was called Eco Challenge. It was on a cable, and it was adventure racing. It was basically people that love to climb up mountains and love to traverse this terrible, horrible terrain, and they would race across the country through this terrain. So that was kind of the demographic for this show. That's their casting base. They grabbed people who were in Eco Challenge.
Is this the fellow who does the presenting?
No, that's the host, Jeff Probst. Jeff Probst has almost nothing to do with it.
This is the producer.
The producer. So the audience for the show was adventure racing people.
What other shows do they do?
Who? Mark Burnett, the producer?
Yes.
He did one called The Apprentice, the Donald Trump show, which you may have heard of.
Oh my God! Right. Okay.
Yeah. So he was the big producer of all reality shows, but he's the brains behind the show. And Survivor is much closer to Eco Challenge in the first season than it is to Big Brother or anything else. It's an adventure racing show. It was sponsored by the United States Army. A lot of people don't notice that. That's the main sponsor of the first show. So that's the audience.
Right. And that's going to become relevant when we get to what happens with the vote. But so we have the swimming challenge. The important thing here is just the Tagi wins. A smear, a basket, a straw.
Can I also say how fascinated and impressed I was with the underwater filming?
Yes, they've always been.
Yeah. It's very early reality TV. It's amazing what they were able to pull off because no other show is doing that kind of underwater footage yet.
No, and it's just so it's beautifully done.
And what is interesting though is that, but there's no commentary. Like during the challenge, we're not hearing Probst tell us what's going on. Right? It's kind of silent with some music.
At that point, I love the absence of commentary. I find the commentary really irritating.
Yes, thank you, Tim. You're wandering into a hornet's nest here. This is something that Survivor fans have debated for years.
And maybe the commentary is what makes the show. And I met the person who wrote the commentary for The Circle. I met somebody who wrote commentary for and did commentary for Big Brother. And I just think I just think it's cruel and rather unpleasant. And I don't want the voice of God everywhere.
Yes, thank you. I love that you said this.
Particularly God is destructive.
And I guess for me, maybe because I'm just used to it, but for me, it is kind of disconcerting to not have the commentary.
You don't hear this voice all the time, do you?
Tim, starting at about the 5th or 6th season, the host narrates every single challenge, and he will, as the series goes along, he starts berating people. You're doing terribly. You're horrible at this. Like it's horrible. So I'm so glad that you like the lack of commentary.
I detest it.
Yes.
I detest it. I want the host and I want the commentator to be there with the audience, to be enthusing as if they. I don't like the idea that you've got this person who is egging us on to a particular conclusion.
Yes.
It seems to me it treats me like a fool, and I don't like anybody.
Tim Wilson is the greatest Survivor fan ever. I'm decreeing this right now.
Oh, please, thank you very much.
Nobody agrees
Well,
with you, Tim. Nobody agrees with you but me.
I would happily volunteer to do a sort of very British plummy narration for the next series. I am there. I'm throwing myself out there. You know, you could have this voice. I will happily make jokes at my own expense, but not.
Well, you have to make jokes. No, Probst doesn't make jokes at his own expense, but he loves ball jokes and pole jokes and anything with any kind of double entendre, right? That he can say
I love
at 8
double
p.m.
entendre, but it's me who should be the victim of the joke, not somebody who's sort of sweating their heart out trying to do some ridiculous task that I've set them. No,
this is incredible. I love this.
We should sympathise with them for having to get in these mud baths.
Yes.
You know, and do these ridiculous things, because I'm sure they had no other alternative but to get into the mud. I'm sure this wasn't entirely their decision. Exactly like the rat eating.
It's certainly possible. Yeah, we're going to get to the rat eating. So the only thing.
Wait. You know what's interesting about this is that Tim is approaching this from the perspective of one of the players who was involved in the show. Karen, you're approaching this from someone who's enjoying it, watching it on TV. It's really fascinating to me to hear the two of you approach this. Yeah, because what I've tried to do for years is to try to get the Karens of the world to think more like the Tims.
But I think of everything like as if I were there. I think, you know, how else can you go and see a Shakespeare play except that you think, I could be this character.
Most fans don't think that way. Yeah.
And you go into the Sistine Chapel and you think, I could be God. But I want to imagine that I could be every character presented. And that way I can feel for them, like them, with them. And I can enjoy their experience in a much bigger way. But if I'm being told this person is ridiculous, I don't want to be that person. Oh God, I shrink back from being that person. No, I don't identify with somebody who's ridiculous. I want to experience that ridiculousness in my own way. So I want to experience. I don't want to be told. And that surely is one of the first principles of drama. Show, don't tell.
Right. And we talked about that, right? That they had problems with that, especially in the beginning, because they didn't get every conversation.
But they're going to have more problems with that, as Mario's just said, by introducing a voice of God that is already telling you what to think.
Oh, yeah. But
it's a different problem.
I got to say this.
It's the same problem. You get rid of the problem edition and then you recreate it.
In about the 16th, 15th, 16th season, Jeff Probst, the host, does a little narration at the start of the episode where he starts telling you what happened last episode, and he will start making things up that never happened just because he wants to steer the narrative. It absolutely.
Oh, but we've all seen 24. Kiefer Sutherland was doing that all the time.
Yeah, but wait until you see it on Survivor.
And then they have bits of footage which never existed as well.
Yeah. Jeff Probst loves doing that in the future. He's not doing it yet. So you're seeing early Survivor. It's very, for lack of a better term, it's still pure at this point to an extent.
Right.
So we're moving so far away from reality. This is unreality TV.
Yep.
This is fiction.
It is at a certain point.
Presented as reality. It's so nice to know. It's so nice and so reassuring to know that the US has marketed something that tells us about our time. TV is not presenting us with reality. It's presenting us with a distortion of reality. This is 1984.
Yep. Okay. Here's even further. Tim, you're going to love this. Once we just did season 40. In season 40, they have players who have played 3 and 4 and 5 times who are basically characters now. They get an appearance fee for appearing on the show. It is now 100% scripted fiction. They are playing characters and being paid to play characters. It is no longer reality TV by this point.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Mario,
I mean, that is an extreme way of describing it, but you're not wrong. But you're not wrong.
I'm not wrong at all.
Get me on. I will undermine the whole thing.
Yeah. Tim and he has a sympathetic ear to my argument. I've been looking for a Tim in my world for a long time. Because most Survivor fans don't want Yes. Most Survivor fans don't want to hear this stuff. That's the problem.
I just think it's wonderful. I'm so excited. Now I'm going to go on to episode 4 with such enthusiasm, Karen. With such enthusiasm. Because
Look what
this
I do,
one,
Karen.
I was dreaming of mud baths. It was not pleasant. In fact, I had a serious problem. I spent quite a lot of time in the loo, but I was creating my own mud bath. No, I'm so sorry. We don't want to go there. We don't want to go there. Stop, Tim. Stop.
All right, let's stop.
Sure it was the result of Survivor.
Right. But everybody wants to talk about the rat eating. So just to get to that point. So again, Rich, so Tagi wins the spear, and Rich is able to, I think he nabbed 3 eels. And even the people who were questioning, whether they really wanted to eat eels.
Were they eels? They look more like sort of
rays. I'm sorry, they were rays.
It's a ray.
I'm sorry, they were rays. Right.
Yeah, they did look disgusting as well, frankly.
But again, I've never eaten a ray, and they're obviously very hungry. But Tagi seems to be quite happy eating the ray. Yeah. And Pagong, not having the fishing implements or whatever, they decided.
As I think we would have had a so much more interesting series if we had people with dietary concerns, so with religious dietary laws. So we had some Buddhists, some Muslims, and some Jews.
It happens a bit, but again, it really does. People like this tend to self-select out. Like I keep kosher, and I could never do a show like Survivor because I'm sure they would find a way for you to do it. Oh, they would allow me to play, but if I couldn't eat any of the shellfish or the things that other people are eating, or then even when there is a reward challenge and there's meat that's not kosher, right? Yeah. They would allow me to play, but there's not enough food for anybody. And then even there have been vegetarians who've played and have come out, I guess, both times on whether they are going to eat meat under the circumstances or not.
Oh, well, so it becomes cruel. It becomes cruel and nasty, and let's make the vegetarian eat meat.
Yes. Well, you're not making them, right?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You've got producers down the beach.
Not everybody eats, because the thing with Ethan. So in the 3rd episode, there was a contestant who did keep kosher. Third season, right? And so there was a very famous point where they had a Survivor auction and they could win various food items, but they were covered, so you didn't know exactly what you were bidding on. And so this man, Ethan, who, kept kosher, got, this plate of American breakfast with, what was it? So there's eggs and there's pancakes or whatever, and there's bacon. And one of the other players, and Mario, feel free to drop, because I haven't seen the season in years, and I'm sure you know better than I do. But another one of the players instantly is very, very excited. And he said, he's a Jew. He won't eat the ham. Right. And he didn't. Yes. He gave it was ham, not bacon. So he gave the ham to this other fellow. Right, who isn't Jewish, but no. So Ethan, and to me,
may I ask a question here?
Sure.
Have they ever had this closed box raffle for food before?
Yes.
Well,
actually, Africa might have been the first.
I think right. So Africa, you're saying that maybe they set him up. You're saying in terms of the ham?
Yeah.
It's certainly possible, but
it's you can test it. Have they done it before?
Right, and certainly if they haven't done it before, they're certainly going to do it plenty of times after.
Mario, that is your mission now. You need to find out, had they done this before? If they hadn't,
this was the first auction, right?
It was the first covered food auction,
right?
So this was simply designed to see whether or not they could push.
Yeah, they want to get a gotcha. They want to get people to bid on a food item that's crappy. That's what they want. They want that moment.
But either way, it still makes good TV. So Ethan didn't eat the ham,
TV.
Right? But if he ate it, that would be TV. And
it also does something wonderful for our society. It exposes issues about kashrut and all these things about dietary laws, which the majority of people know nothing about. Yeah. So suddenly you've got a debate on national television about something that actually defines so many people's lives, both in in so many religious cultures, that defines people's lives.
Mm-hmm. But I was really surprised, actually, again, under the circumstances, right? And given how hungry they are, I would not have looked down on Ethan if he had eaten it, right? But I was certainly very interested that he didn't. And my kids, again, who were in elementary school at the time, right? The fact that they could see, somebody on TV making the same choices that they're making, right? It's the minority opinion. But that made them feel proud to be Jews. Yes. But like I said, I don't think they would have had a bad moment either way.
And what's happening to Ethan now?
So it's funny you
got a long story here, Tim.
Long story. He actually just came back for this last most recent season.
He's been back again.
Yes.
Yeah, but in the interim, he beat cancer twice.
Twice, yeah.
He had a really inspiring story. Yeah, he is probably one of the most inspiring Survivor players ever.
Yeah, so maybe we'll get to.
Well, I hope I hope we'll get to him in person as well.
Mm-hmm.
But so Mario, what are the missing? What are the statements and things which I have missed in this episode, which we've elided through as we've gone through? Because as far as I'm concerned, very little has happened in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I've missed quite a lot.
Yeah,
so,
well,
is this one expression or something that I should have been looking at?
Well, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff in these 3 episodes in particular that you may not have seen. Like the original, I know Mark Burnett wrote a book. The producer of the show wrote a book, documented exactly how it went down. It's really fascinating to see. I
actually ordered that book, but it's still not here. So I'm probably going to get it just a little bit too late to consult it. But
it's really fascinating to read that and then watch the TV show at the same time, if you can. Basically, what happened was on Tagi, Richard was supposed to go first. Richard Hatch was supposed to be the first one voted out. The big fat guy, the bearded guy, the gay guy. And the only reason he wasn't was because Sonia was such a liability that they had to vote her out. She was just weak. They got to get rid of her.
So what? Production had already made a decision.
No, the players had already made a decision. And in fact, Richard was cast because they knew he'd be voted out first. They cast him to fail because he was such a blowhard and a know-it-all. That's like the only reason we cast this guy is we know he'll be voted out first. No one will get along with him.
Because he has time to forge a relationship with the least likely friend, Rudy.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to survive for quite some time, I think.
He will probably do pretty well because not only did he survive that first vote, but he also in this episode gets that fishing spear. And Richard, if you know anything about his history, grew up in the waters of Providence, Rhode Island, swimming and fishing, and he did this stuff for a living. So like he was almost an amateur professional spearfisher. So like all of a sudden he has immense value to his tribe he never would have had earlier. And there's another scene that I got to point out. Karen may not even know about this scene, but I've talked about this on Historians. It's not in the episode, but the night before the first tribal council, they were all sitting around the fire, and that's where Richard came out of the closet to everybody on the tribe. They didn't know he was gay.
Nice.
And so he came out of the closet and he explained he had an abusive childhood. His stepfather beat him. He was basically abandoned. His father wouldn't let him stay in the house because he was gay. And so a lot of the females on the tribe really rallied around Richard and started to feel more protective towards him because he showed his more vulnerable side. And that was a very important reason why the women on the tribe start to like him and stop making fun of him.
But there's only three women in this tribe.
Yes, there's Sue and Kelly and Stacy. And Stacy cannot stand Richard. Stacy hates him because Stacy's very smart and she fears him. But Sue and Kelly very much become attached to Richard and very protective of him. And that's why they let him into their alliance. That there was already an all-female alliance.
What was it Richard that made Stacy eat the bugs?
Yeah, well, Richard's on her tribe. The other tribe made Stacy eat the bugs. It was the other tribe picked her.
It was the other tribe. So
but Richard and Stacy were probably the two sharpest people on that tribe, and they were at each other's throats right from the start.
Right, because they looked around and realized that the other one was going to be their competition.
Yes. So
but another way to play that would have been to buddy off with each other.
Of course, that would have worked out great too. They just didn't do that.
Right.
But there's a lot of interesting things with Richard. Yeah, there's a lot of fascinating stuff with Richard. Why he suddenly gains a little value here he didn't have in the first episode.
Oh yeah, it's not a little thing. The fact that they're feeding everybody,
like but that the biggest value that he seems to get, I think, is that he has time to forge his link with Rudy.
Yes, that's very important. It's very important for Rudy and very important for Richard. Yeah,
and this happens all the time, Tim, on many of these shows. That 3 days is a long time in a game like this, and so often even if you seem to be on the bottom, right? If you can somehow survive, or even just your tribe wins immunity. So, like certainly with Bibi, I would think after 3 days, Pagong would have been ready to get rid of him then, right? But Pagong won that challenge, and so he got another 3 days. Now, in his case, it didn't help because he didn't change anything that he was doing. But if you can get through that first or second tribal council, than even if you were the kind of person who otherwise would be more likely to be in danger, because older people tend to go out early, especially older women, etc. But once you get past those first couple of tribal councils and you get to know these people as people, then you know, so you would think, oh, if someone almost went home in the first episode, that they're not going to be around for so long. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. It's not at all uncommon for somebody to just make it through and then be around for quite a while.
Yeah. And there's another variable here, Tim. You'll find this very interesting because it's not really mentioned in the show, but it will explain a lot of the stuff you're going to see here. Is that, you know, Rudy comes in there, I don't like homosexuals. I don't like queers. He would start throwing that around. And then suddenly he starts to bond with Richard. And what the important variable you're missing there is that Richard was ex-military. Richard went through officer training, and Rudy very much respects someone who's gone through military training. And so that's one of the reasons.
We don't find that out, do we?
They never mentioned that in the show, that Richard was military, but it's very important. Rudy is not just out of the largesse of his heart bonding with Richard. Rudy sees this guy's military. He follows instructions. He's responsible. I like this guy. That's a big variable.
And there's certain other people he doesn't really have anything in common.
Yes.
So let's assume that they were certainly hoping that something like this might happen.
Yeah.
Yes, I see.
Right. But let's go just in the interest of time, because I do, so I'm just going to kind of yada through Pagan eats the rats, right? It's not as bad as they thought it was going to be. Then there's this, I just want to yada all of this because this vote is going to be important in ways that Tim does not really even understand.
Really?
We're about to explain what happened in this episode.
Yeah.
So just to get to this point, so Pagan eats rat, it's not as bad as they thought. They do this immunity challenge where they have to choose their smallest member, right? They build a stretcher and then the production hides their smallest person somewhere in the jungle, right? They hang them up in a tree. You have to go get them, put them on the stretcher, run back, right? And as we know, Tagi loses the challenge, right? And apparently, at least the way it was edited, it's supposed to be like within seconds, right? We don't know if that's really true, but it was very close. Okay. So having set that all up, now we're going to tribal council. And so Mario, I'll let you take it from there, right? So we know immediately it's going to be Rudy versus Stacy, right? And Rudy says, I don't like her and I never will. Right.
Yeah. She's a little too prim.
Yeah.
That's what he says.
But Stacy has already made enemies.
She has made enemies. The girls don't like her. Sue in particular.
She's presented quite badly in this episode, actually. Although, and Karen, you said your everybody gets the exit episode where they have quite a story to tell. Often, yes. Bibi's story is quite interesting in the last thing, interesting and depressing. This one, Stacey just comes across appallingly, I think.
Well, okay, I'm going to let Mario, I'm going to let you take it from here. So what we saw on the television show.
The back of her, I'm afraid.
I have a lot to say about that. Don't worry.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so the way the story is told on television, right, was that they did this thing with the conch shell, tried to play Lord of the Flies, and Rich says,
also Lord of the Flies, isn't it? Even with the end hanging in the trees. Yeah,
they're trying their best. Yeah,
right, But anyway, this is how it's set up. And this is probably one of the biggest stories, I would say, in Survivor, in terms of an episode where there is an allegation that what happened on the TV show, what we saw on the TV episode, is not exactly what happened on the beach. So again, I'm going to say allegedly, because, CBS has never obviously admitted to any of this, and I wasn't here. But Mario's going to tell us an interesting story about what might have happened while this particular episode was being filmed.
Allegedly. Yeah.
Okay, yes, allegedly. Okay. Go ahead, Mario.
When this episode aired, no one really batted an eye. They're like, because like the old people were going first. First it was Sonia, then it was Bibi, and you think it would be Rudy next. And so the pattern kind of switches here where, Stacy gets voted out instead. And no one really batted an eye about that at the time. But after the season aired, I'm not going to spoil what happens, but we get to the end of the season, there was all these controversies that came out that, hey, Stacy wasn't supposed to go home that third episode. Rudy was supposed to go home the third episode. And there's all these stories that the producers had talked to the Tagis and said, why don't you the vote with your conscience instead. We really would like to have Rudy stick around. It would be good for the show. We need the demographics. We need the audience, the military is the sponsor. We don't really want to lose Rudy. So there was lots of allegations.
That's obvious. Allegedly.
Yeah. Allegedly. I mean, there's
Dirk, I think it was Dirk specifically, and I think also Sean.
Dirk and Sean.
So they
said that
they were people aside.
Yes, they were pulled aside by the producers and said, "Are you sure you want to be voting out Rudy tonight? Think of what you might need in the future, blah, blah, blah." And again, who knows what happened. But this became a big controversy because a journalist named Peter Lance wrote a book about it. There's an entire book about this one episode of Survivor. It's called The Stingray.
So,
what happened?
How would the information have got out there given the watertight contracts?
Because Stacey apparently was taught. This guy Peter Lance was writing a biography on a certain player from the season. I'm not going to say who it was. In the context of researching this player, he came across Stacey, and Stacey said, "Oh, I wasn't supposed to be voted out that night. It was supposed to be Rudy," and the producers basically fudged it and talked them into voting out Rudy instead. And this became an enormous scandal. I mean, this almost took down Survivor.
And there was a lawsuit.
There was, again, this is where we get into the alleged and who said what, but there is a deposition.
Rudy would have been voted out.
Rudy
would have gone out.
He was being bossy.
Yes, because if you follow the storyline, he probably should have been voted out next. Rudy was not really popular. He wasn't really adding anything. He was bossy. So that's where, if you look at the first two episodes, Rudy's supposed to be next, and then all of a sudden it pivots, the story switches a little. And if you watch this whole tribal council at the end, it's very quick. It's very abrupt. There's not a lot of explanation. Just all of a sudden Stacey goes and she looks at Sue and says, "You changed your vote." And that's what she's talking about there, that Sue was originally, she's blaming people. The plan was to vote out.
Right. But didn't Sue already kind of lie to Stacey about who she was voting for the last time?
Sue was not involved, I don't think.
Would the producers have been that obvious, or surely the producers would have been a tap on the shoulder?
That's the question.
I will say, Tim, if you go online, there is an entire deposition. There was a whole court case about this, and it was really hushed up. A lot of fans didn't know about it until midway through the second season, or I forget when. But there's a whole deposition where Dirk from this season appeared in court under oath, and it's all on the internet. You can read it. It's a court document, and it's really damning of how obvious the producers were.
And was it Dirk who was made to change his testimony?
Dirk and Sean.
Well, that's the thing. Dirk would say they didn't make me change my vote. He would say they encouraged me to change my vote. They talked to me until I can change my vote. The producers cannot control who you vote for, but there is a big gray area, especially in this first season, what exactly the producers were allowed to tell the players.
Right. And even in subsequent seasons, right, they've never done anything nearly this blatant since. And so if it did happen, they learned from it, right? And they learned, okay, we cannot be this blatant. But even continuing today, it's clear when they sit down, to the producer and they ask them, this, right? They're asking them kind of leading questions already to try to get these confessionals, which you're arguing aren't really confessionals. But they can also deliberately or not deliberately, and I would say maybe they've done both, right? Kind of planting the idea in a contestant's head. So you wouldn't pull somebody aside and say, maybe rather don't vote for Rudy, maybe you want to vote for Stacey. They wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But they can say something that will make you think that maybe this other person is after you, right? Things like that.
Yeah.
And those things continue.
Yeah. And I will say, earlier in this conversation, I said that I try to get the Karens of the world to think of Survivor more like the Tims of the world. I'm going to flip that and do it just the opposite here. That all of this is pretty much, you can't argue. All of this pretty much happened. You can read the court deposition again. The allegedly is all in the details. Who knows exactly what the specifics were? But I've always argued the producers had every right to do this because they're making a TV show, not a game. And so this is where I pivot and say, thinking of Survivor, like Tim's point of view here, is not helpful here.
Mario, at this particular point, I'm afraid I am with you. So although I appear on one side, I can quite happily go onto the other side. Particularly in this case, I am in the business of entertainment, and you would want to make sure the best person wins. I mean, if somebody were voted off and they were prime television fodder, wouldn't the producers have a way of bringing them back?
Yep.
Right.
That's the argument, and I know.
Can't they do that?
I think it's a fine line, because I do feel like if there is too much of this production interference and it's too blatant and people know about it, then I think that that would affect the viewership, because people want to believe that they are watching a fair game.
It's
Which
still
is
a fair game.
Yeah.
I mean, look. I hate to keep coming back to my brush with reality TV.
Well, that's why we're here, Tim.
In the circle, 2 people got voted off. And really, in many ways, they hadn't acquitted themselves that well. They were voted off almost within a day of arriving. And the next thing we knew, they'd been put into an apartment together, and they became a new character called Joyce, and she was brilliant. And yeah, I didn't think she was real, but out of all the people who weren't real, she was the one I was able to draw the best.
Okay, so are you going where I think you're going then, Tim? Because,
because
the original 2 people who were in the circle were not great TV. I'm sure they're lovely people. They were not great TV. But
together they were brilliant TV, and they made such a brilliant contribution to the show by being brought back. So in that particular case,
so Mario, are you going where I'm going? Is your mind going where my mind is going on this?
I am curious where he's going with this, but I'm sure I will agree with him. I've already figured out what he's talking about.
I just think the producers are God on the show, and they know what makes good entertainment. It may not be fair,
right?
But you've got to have one eye on being good entertainment, because you know we have seen shows. I mean, there's Strictly Come Dancing and stuff, where actually they get rather boring towards the end, because all you've got are particularly good dancers. And all the interesting people have been whittled out because they can't do it. And yes, the only reason for watching this is to watch people who can do the job beautifully and well. And that's not necessarily the greatest TV.
Right.
And the greatest TV is watching the characters develop.
So Tim, so this is my question then for you, and you probably never thought of this quite this way, and I wasn't really thinking about it until now. But like I said, Jack and Beth, who both seem to be lovely people, but you know, we're like watching paint dry on TV. Didn't you find it curious that when you put the 2 of them together, both of whom are boring, suddenly they together create this character who is fascinating?
Yes,
I'm insinuating that they might have had help.
But I have met Beth and Jack independently.
Okay.
And they're far from boring. Okay. So somehow the show presented them, or what we saw was dull, or what I saw was dull, but together they were scintillating.
And I was just questioning whether there was any chance that they became a lot more interesting when they had a little bit of help.
They certainly became a lot more interesting when they had a little bit of help.
I'm saying bit of help, not only in terms of each other, but query whether production helped them create the character of Joyce. I don't know that this is true. I wasn't there. I have absolutely no proof. The wheels are turning.
I'm sure there were elements of Joyce which were already sort of locked in. Joyce was a character who was going to appear, I think. It was just a matter of who was going to bring her to life. I thought Jack and Beth brought her to life beautifully. And
she was great,
funny and delightful. And by that point, I haven't seen those episodes, but I did experience it in real life, and I just loved talking to Joyce. I loved it.
So you're saying that even if I was absolutely true, and let's say that they really had nothing to do, that they were given the character of Joyce. Again, you're agreeing with Mario. You're saying I don't care, right? They made a good TV show. And you know, and certainly that's been Mario's position. But again, that is a minority position, I think, in terms of both certainly in the regular fan community, you know, but even in the super fan community.
But Karen, remember what I said right at the beginning. You know, our society is based on deceit. So if we have an element of deception in reality TV, that is reality. What I find disturbing. What I find disturbing is when that deceit gets overwhelmingly dominant, and when it's not only deceit but nastiness. So deceit and a little bit of kindness, that's just good TV. It's good entertainment. That's a magician's show, isn't it? the sleight of hand. But deceit and nastiness, which I think potentially Survivor has that potential towards nastiness, and definitely Big Brother has that potential towards nastiness. And I find that's the disturbing element where the kindness is lost in the deceit.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree with you.
And part of that is this obsessive idea that everybody is motivated by the $1 million. I remember when we got to the end of the circle, we had this question: what would you do if you won? Are you looking forward to winning £100,000? And well, I have no interest in it, and really, I'm not going to win. I just want to be there to see Woody or Ella win, and I hadn't. The thought of winning just hadn't crossed my mind. And no matter how much that question was presented to me, it wasn't a question that I was going to answer in any straightforward way, because it simply didn't. What would you do to win, I think, was the question. And what they wanted was nastiness, and it wasn't on my horizon. And I hadn't played the game like that, and I wasn't going to start. Certainly, I mean, if they want me to have an edge, I will have an edge. But if they want me to have an edge, then they're going to have to deceive me, and they're going to have to. The whole thing is going to have to be the bad guy. And I wasn't. I didn't feel like that. I felt I was in a good place.
I have to tell you,
so
Tim.
Were you. I've got the other competitor here, by the way. I took my cat in with me.
Yes, and he's never been the same since. Is that why he's yowling? Because you're not putting him on camera?
Absolutely.
I gotta say, Tim, Tim, if you keep watching Survivor, I don't know if you're going to keep watching after this season. In season 4, there's a player named Gabriel who very much is like what you're talking about. He loves Survivor. He loves the experience. He has no interest in winning, and he has no interest in voting anybody out or being cruel to anybody. And it's very interesting to watch the other players react to him. They think he's basically a Martian. They have no idea how to relate to him.
Right. Because most people go on a show when a show has a prize of $1 million. Most people go on the show because they want to get $1 million. But and like I said, and this has continued, I would say, even up to today. But have there been any other modern survivors who you feel like just were there for other reasons? I mean, it still happens. It happens less, but it still happens.
They would not cast you nowadays for that reason. The game is very dogmatic now, Tim. You must worship the game. You must worship the strategy. You must be here to blindside people and make grid TV, and they will not cast you if you're not with that mindset anymore.
I see.
That's season 40 mentality. Season 1 is not. They wouldn't
be interested in me at all.
No,
but I think they ought to consider me as a disembodied voice.
Absolutely.
I would definitely like you to be the disembodied voice on the next season of The Circle. Can you be that snarky though? So the circle announcer is extremely.
I can promise you I can do irony. I can do cutting observation.
Can you be as cutting as the announcer though?
No, I wouldn't be remotely interested in that. It wouldn't be that sort of narrative. I wouldn't do it.
To go back to what Tim was saying a minute ago, by the way, is that there's 2 games on Survivor. Now, this is probably true for every reality show, but specifically Survivor.
Absolutely.
You're playing against the other players, and you're playing against the producers. Yeah.
What? Go on.
You're playing against the producers, and you're playing against the players. There's 2 games.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think you play with the producers, but you work out what the producers want.
Correct. Unless you're, again, Johnny Fairplay in season 7 came in with his own narrative. He overrode the entire show to the point the producers were like, "You jerk, now you're the star. You weren't supposed to be the star. You made yourself the star. Thank you."
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I do have theories about this, but as long as you are in sync with the production will fall in sync with you. Mm-hmm. And if you are good television, the producers know what is where their money is. Mm-hmm. Their money lies in producing good TV. Mm-hmm. And if you are good TV, you will be there.
Yeah. Now, I do have to, again, give a plug to that book, The Stingray by Peter Lance, because not only does it detail all the behind-the-scenes shenanigans and all the stuff that went on and what you didn't see on the show, but it even lays out exactly what you talked about, Tim, how Stacy is presented especially bad in season 3, in episode 3, just so the audience will turn on her and hate her. And it points out exactly what they do.
But what we were talking about this, Karen, last time, and you were saying basically, in that booting episode, most people get their time, and it looks good, and it's quite nice to see that arc. Whereas Stacey, what you get is quite the reverse. What you get is a sort of
she gets a hit job.
Is a hatchet job from beginning through to end, and then she's out, and you think, thank God for that. Goodbye.
Yep. And that's what the book goes into, exactly how the producers do it, why they do it, and how you as a viewer were manipulated into wanting her to go.
Is that pretty well the only time that sort of narrative happens?
No.
This is a particularly blatant.
Yeah, this is the first, but it's going to get much worse in future seasons. There's one episode in season 6, The Amazon, where they just shit all over this guy for an hour, just make fun of him. They hang his underwear up on a tent pole, and all the other players make fun of it, and they vote him out. It's the most brutal hatchet job you've ever seen on a player.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Yeah. So that's worse than the mud bath.
Oh, it's way worse. Yeah. Season 1 is very benign and gentle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and even the fact that these things were, controversial, not that, because like I said, because I think if the average Survivor viewer knew about this and the depth in which it can occur, that might really influence the way that they view the game. But no.
It should make them watch the show better. I mean, it makes you appreciate it from an art point of view more than a game point of view. That's what I do, Tim, in my writing. I try to get people to appreciate these shows from the artistry side, the storytelling side, why the producers do things the way they do, why things are shown. So I think that's a much more third-dimensional and enjoyable way to watch it.
That is what is so exciting. We understand each other immediately on that one. Yeah. I think reality TV from that point of view, what you're looking at is concocting an entire story. You are in fact creating a drama. So you need to create a drama.
Yeah, it's a drama and it's magic. It's like if you've seen the movie The Blair Witch Project, they just took real footage, made a fake movie out of it. That's exactly what Survivor is. And Mark Burnett, the producer, said that from day one. He said the Blair Witch Project was his inspiration. That's what he wanted to do.
I must add, I hated the Blair Witch Project because it didn't have enough. It didn't have enough creative input. I thought
it didn't, but you can appreciate the thought process behind it.
Oh, I can absolutely, absolutely. But I've also rather hated artists who do their found projects.
Yeah, but that was the first. That's the thing.
I find that sort of thing irritating. But I find the idea of finding something or using something and molding it, that is art.
Yeah,
and that's what takes reality TV to an entirely new level. That's what so as somebody who's coming into this very late in the game and bizarrely I haven't seen very much of it. I find this a very exciting phenomenon and something that needs to be celebrated. It is up there with the development of drama. It's a different approach to the dramatic model.
Right. But again,
unscripted drama.
Right. That's right. Mark Burnett still won't call this a reality show, right? He calls it an unscripted drama.
Which I think is, I think he's wrong to call it unscripted. It's just surreptitiously scripted.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of scripting in reverse, because obviously there are times that production, wants certain things to happen. But I feel like what happens often a lot is that they don't even have to go that far, because if you cast certain people in certain combinations, right, you can kind of predict the way that they're probably going to behave, and so therefore they don't even have to manipulate it, right?
Yep.
But when necessary, they can nudge it along.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to point out.
Says in their interviews, their countless interviews and their countless production meetings, if somebody says, "Oh, this, and this are the things I'm interested in," and then they come up on camera and they say, "I'm not interested in this, I'm not interested in that, and I'm not interested in this," and completely subvert the system, then you're in a strange position, and that happens. I know. In fact, I've spoken to people who've done it. And then either they end up with a really fortuitous situation, and the producer think, oh, "Wow, how wonderful! This person is better than we ever thought," or they end up sort of being booted off quite quickly, because they're not giving the goods that their producers thought they would give.
Yeah, they won't give them any screen time.
There is also the situation where the producers have misread somebody, and actually they've got much more to offer than the producers thought, which is certainly possible. But essentially, what we're dealing with is a production company which has got experience of doing this sort of thing. They know what they're looking for, or they may not know what they're looking for, but they know it when they see it.
Yes.
And no TV executive, no production company is going to turn their nose up at good television. And if somebody is good television, why would you not want to keep them?
No, I agree.
Because that's what's keeping the viewers. It doesn't matter if there's a slight distortion in the gameplay, because and there
are other things we've already discussed that I think are much less controversial, although they could be used in different ways. But things like just rearranging the order in which events take place. That's very common in reality.
Yes,
and it can be misleading, or it can just be kind of a way of cleaning up the narrative because they've only got 42.
Can I ask? Do you think all the decisions have been taken by the time the editing of episode 2 took place? Presumably, yes. So episode 2 was edited in the knowledge that Stacey had been kicked off.
Yes, of course, absolutely. Yes. They wait until the season's done, then they edit it all. There are season-long narratives. The editors are very good at setting things up.
Why didn't they move the bug eating thing, where Stacey comes off looking rather good, into episode 3?
Well, they have to basically keep the narrative structure of the show, that they need an immunity challenge in every episode, right? They don't necessarily, so they can't necessarily just move things around.
So but basically, Stacey did nothing of virtue in episode 3 at all. I just find that improbable. and yet she was so interesting in episode 2. Well, interesting enough in episode 2 anyway. She had a bug in her mouth. I just find it extraordinary, that element of the hatchet job. Now, there's something else I've got. Sean something, boring ally when girls go to find nuts. Sean building
bowling alley.
Yes, that's for next. That's the next episode, right?
Oh, how do I know that? Have I looked at that?
They might have done it in the preview.
At the very end of this episode, they say, next week on Survivor.
Oh right. Oh right. I see.
So that's right. Next week we'll see the bowling alley.
Yep.
Oh, Sean building bowling alley. Right. Yeah. I see. When girls go to find nuts.
Tim, I want to say something to you that you'll find very interesting. Right. Is that I have been writing about Survivor from this perspective for a long time, from a storytelling perspective, production storyteller perspective. I love the editors. I'm always pointing out things the editors do, and the editors are the stars of the show.
The editors are wonderful.
Yeah, but
the editors of any program are wonderful.
There's a lot of Survivor fans who push back against me, the stuff that I write. I have a very polarizing fan base. People really like me or really don't like me. And the people that don't like me tend to be the people that think Survivor is a sport and it's 100% legit, and they will not hear any argument otherwise. And they do not like that I say that. They will dig in their heels, and they have hated me for years. But meanwhile, the people on the show.
You have a fan here. You have a fan here because I think we speak the same language.
Yeah, but the players tend to like me. The editors love me. The editors are always writing me, telling me how much they love that I'm writing about them. So it's like the people that know how Survivor works are big fans of mine. People who are more casual, just think of it as a sport, hate my guts. So it's like I'm very polarizing.
And clearly, and you can see how upset he is about this.
Terrible. Mario loves tears.
How did you get into this? What's your background? Is your background in film or?
No, my background is in psychology. Is that I first started writing about the first season because I like psychology. I'm sociology. I love how societies form. And I love, this is how this is going to work. This is how this is going to work. And I'm like, This is like a very unethical psychology experiment they would never put in a college campus because it's too traumatizing, where you're forced to bond together and then to turn on each other. That's horrible. They would never do that. So I got into that, and I would just write about the show, not from the strategy, but just from the psychology. And eventually the players would start contacting me and give me the inside information. So I became like the voice of the players. They would say, this is what's really going on. And so I would approach the show differently than the fans do. Yeah.
And maybe you want to explain to Tim, like the difference between like the mainstream Survivor press and Survivor Sucks.
Yeah.
We got to rip the Band-Aid off and give Tim all the bad news.
Back in the late 90s, there was a big, like the internet was in its infancy, but there were a lot of TV message boards where people would talk about TV shows. And for everyone who loved a TV show, there was someone who hated a TV show. And sometimes they would intertwine. And there was a website called Survivor Sucks, where people who loved Survivor and people who hated Survivor would all get together and either make fun of it or snark about it or love to hate it or make fun of it in a loving way. And that's kind of my sense of humor, where I take digs at people and roast the show, but it's in a loving way that I have sympathy for anybody who's on the show, because I feel bad that they've gone through the machinations of Survivor. But Survivor Sucks was a lawless place. Anything went. The language was terrible. There was memes. There was things making fun of the players, but it wasn't as personal as you see now, where the fans can attach to the players on social media and tell them to kill themselves.
Yeah.
It was very detached back in the day, where the players and the fans were not allowed to interact whatsoever. So it was very, I thought, emotionally healthy. So even though Survivor Sucks had a reputation of being lawless and horribly offensive, it was not as personal as Survivor is now. So I thought it was much healthier because there was a distance.
Yes, and back in the day, if you really wanted to, connect with a survivor, I mean, it was possible, I guess, to do it online. But again, like literally, you'd have to send them a letter, right? Or you'd have to know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. Whereas these days with Twitter, that's the thing, is that they are instantly available to everybody who has an opinion about the show, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, and I am a former Survivor Suckster. I was known for making parody things and jokes, and there was hundreds of me at one time, and then all the original fans left, and so I'm just kind of one of the only few Survivor Sucksters left, and that's why I kind of have a reputation of being, blunt and honest, because I can tell the truth, and I'm not very polished. Most of the Survivor media now is very polished. They're working hand in hand with the show to portray it as a certain way. And I'm one of the few left from the old days who knows how chaotic the show really is. And I can point out what it's really like.
And Mario, where are you based?
I'm in California, Southern California.
Oh my goodness. The land of milk and honey.
Yes.
So what, in LA or something?
Yeah, I mean, right outside LA. I don't know if you can tell, I'm outside in our beautiful California weather. It's so wonderful here all year long. So yeah, I'm in Southern California, but again, I have no background in TV writing, journalism, anything. I like TV. I'm really good at picking out storylines. I do podcasts about movies where I pick up movies that people don't like and explain why people should like them. I'm good at explaining narratives to people. And I'm just one of the guys.
Is there a movie I should be looking at the moment?
Current movies, none, because there's a pandemic, but I have hundreds. I have a website. Go to staffpicks.podbean.com. It's a website, a podcast called Staff Picks.
We're going to have to meet up on.
I'll send you the link.
On email later. You're going to have to send me that, because bizarrely today I was drawing until about 2 minutes before we started. And because there's some interesting political stuff going on in Britain at the moment, and I like to draw. I like to draw the people in the news, because it's fascinating. When you draw somebody, I don't know whether you draw, but when you draw somebody, you sort of see into their mind. And what I find is when I draw somebody who's a bit sort of dodgy, they come out as a little bit more caricatured. When I draw somebody who's actually quite nice, they come out as basically quite nice. And there's some very interesting people at the moment, and I'm trying to draw them. And it's proving to be the case. The people who are odd are coming out as odd drawings. And I did get a little bit of social media backlash yesterday, which
for what you posted,
which I've never had before.
Oh yeah.
And it was backlash from somebody who hid their identity, which I thought was interesting as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I hadn't done much more than just simply put up what was already there. So yeah.
I am well versed in the social media world. I have a very thick skin. I have been people, you've yelled at me for years. I've heard had the most horrible things. I've had people calling my house, telling me my website sucks. Like, I'm very thick-skinned because I'm a survivor suckster, but I have great sympathy for anybody like you who's gone through the reality TV machine, has been chewed up, your life has been changed, you may have not known what you were in for. And that's what I do is I try to get people to not be as emotionally invested in reality TV. I want you to enjoy it for what it is, but don't get that wrapped up. It's not real life. What we see in TV didn't really happen. It's all manipulated, but I try to get people to appreciate it from a different level. And that's my thing. I love Survivor, but it's from a different level than other people do. And that's hard for people to understand sometimes.
Well, it's fascinating. It's fascinating meeting, and we will pursue this further. In fact, at the moment, somebody's trying to get me to do a podcast. I was thinking, why would I want to do my own podcast when I'm so invested in doing podcasts with other people? But maybe I should. In which case, Mario, maybe you will come along to my podcast, and Karen, you will come along to mine.
Sure.
We will have to discuss these things with a slightly different angle.
Absolutely.
Anyway, at the moment, I haven't agreed to it, and I'm supposed to write a pitch. Well, I can't write a pitch for something I'm not terribly interested in doing. I quite like being on other people's podcasts. But and having one of my own, what identity would I have? Do you have an idea for me, Mario? Come on, you're the ideas man here.
Well, I would definitely steer into the professor thing. The professor thing. You are the professor of reality TV. I'd steer into that for sure.
No, I'm not really. Do you think so? Well, anyway. Oh, maybe.
You'll need to get the street cred first. Yeah, you need a couple years of street cred first, though. You will need a couple years of street cred first to build up that people will trust you as the professor. But then that's where you're going.
Or you could just be the professor of something else. I mean, like I said, while you're building your expertise in reality TV.
Yeah, mud baths.
Yes,
do you want to talk about politics and draw people? I mean, you seem to have gotten a lot of attention from doing that.
Yeah, I would set me a subject and I would just go. Politics, religion, all the things you're not allowed to talk about, I will talk about them. Taboo subjects. I would love to talk about taboo subjects.
What do you think, Mario? That could work.
Well, that would work because if you like talking, that's the thing. The thing with me, and you may find this hard to believe because you're just meeting me for the first time, I'm very shy. I don't like talking about things. I hide in the shadows. This is the first video podcast.
Mario, you're lovely.
This is the first video podcast I've ever done because I don't like people knowing what I look like. I'm very retiring in general, but I have
Mario. I will set up a podcast simply so that we can meet together on regular occasions, and we can expose you to the world.
No, I'm not exposing myself to anybody. But that is why I do podcasts, because I feel it's my duty. I'm one of the only old school Survivor fans left who can really explain to a modern fan base what the show is. So I feel a sense of duty that I have to do what I do, even though I've been doing it for so long. None of this is really new to me, but I feel if I don't do it, no one else is going to.
Well, can I encourage you to have a look at The Circle and see what and see what
sort of
the alternative thing is out there?
Yeah, I'd love to.
And you can see the episodes with me, which I haven't seen. You can tell me whether or not they look okay.
Yeah, at some point we have to make Tim finish his own season.
Oh, I don't think I can.
I could not watch a season where I was on TV, so I completely understand.
No, that wasn't the issue. Is that there was another contestant who made him feel bad. I mean, Tim really is, and that's what really made me realize that Tim is probably just too good for reality TV.
Yeah.
Because when Richard Madeley made you feel bad, I mean, what he did was so mild compared to almost anything you see on reality TV. He was making fun of your cat, right? He was making fun of Bay.
But not this one. Not this one. He was making fun of the one who is very, very, very ill and old and can barely walk. She slides around the place now, and he was making fun of her because she was in the photograph, and that was all he had. He had a photograph of me and
Tim never watched the rest of his season as a result.
Yeah, Tim is not meant for reality TV.
But I did get a hug from him and from his wife, who really is called Judy and who's lovely. But sadly, although there was somebody chaperoning me who was supposed to be taking photographs, she never took a photograph of that moment. That would have been the iconic moment where Tim met the real Judy, and that's lovely. I feel very proud of that, and I think they're lovely people. But how can reality TV get people to behave so appallingly?
Because the audience wants it.
The audience doesn't want that sort of thing.
They do want it, Tim.
No, and Tim doesn't even understand that we are on the night.
Aaron, more than that, they didn't even broadcast most of the result of that. Whereas I was just lying on my bed weeping for an hour or more. They didn't broadcast any of that. In fact, they made sure it looked as if I was quite happy. As I had a slight frog in my throat. That was it. No, I could barely get out my lines because I was sobbing so much. It was I was uncontrollable.
One thing I can say, Tim, I want to say this to you just so it'll make you feel a little better. My whole world for 20 years has been interacting with reality contestants, and they eventually go on the show and they become the character they were on TV, and there's no reality left in who they are. It's kind of sad to me that they just become a reality TV professional contestant. I really respect that. I know. I really respect that you dragged your feet against that and you are who you are. That I wish I had more of that in my world. I don't see many people like that anymore.
Well, bring me into your world. Bring me into your world. I'd be very happy to come into your world.
Thank you. You're welcome.
But I have to have a world to live in now. I don't know what world I'm going to live in.
But the casting was very, very different between the UK seasons and those films in other countries. And it's not as if there isn't UK reality TV that is just as bad as anything put on by anybody else. But with The Circle, and it was originally based in the UK, the first 2 seasons were in the UK. I mean, there is still conflict and there's still, but they really were, I feel like, trying to make a different kind of product. I mean, part of it is a little bit, Tim maybe was a little bit naive, but it was also just a different kind of show. And then they brought it to the US and it stopped being a different kind of show.
But I think part of the thing was, I mean, I don't want to take too much credit for it, but I saw this image in The Circle of reciprocity, of friendship. And I pushed that forward, and I knew I was doing it, but I also knew that I had an alliance in Woody, who I felt had the same view of society, and also of Ella, and we didn't actively conspire.
Well, the other half of the cast was, but you didn't know that at the time.
What was
there definitely were alliances. There were definitely alliances, right? But I don't know that Tim was so aware of that with Ella.
Woody, myself, and Ella, I don't think we did have an alliance at all. We just wanted this greater circle. Now, what I realized in the end is that Sammy, Georgina, and Paddy created this thing which they call the Circle of Trust, which was an alliance, which was a little plot. And I was quite thrown by it when I discovered about it, and I thought sort of gloating over it was really quite nasty, and I didn't like that, and I resisted it for a long time, and I felt offended by it. But in the end, I suddenly realised they were doing the same thing. They were just simply constructing a smaller circle. You know, it's like the beginning of Fiddler on the Roof, isn't it? And here in our Tesco we have many circles. Did I tell you I was looking at an Israeli version of Fiddler on the Roof the other day, and it's so fascinating because it was much gentler performance than Top Holes, and so different, and it made the second half, which can be so dull, so much more. We did discuss this. I'm so sorry. I'm so repetitive. We have to stop, otherwise I'm simply going to start repeating myself like some sort of mad person. I wouldn't want to be accused of insanity. I've been on reality TV.
So before we go, Mario, are there any other illusions you want to strip Tim?
Not really, but I really want to go back to that question you asked at the start, and we could talk about this for hours. Is reality TV a good thing? That's a question that people have talked about for years, and it's one that I don't think the reality TV fan base talks about enough anymore. I kind of wish people talked about that more because it's interesting to me.
I think, Mario, you need to restructure the question. Here I'm putting on my professor hat.
Okay.
The broad question is reality TV a good thing? Okay, but there's you're going to have to focus it more. Is reality TV in the form that it today manifests a good thing? because it could have gone in, it could have developed in different directions and may still develop in different directions, and has developed in different directions in different countries. So we see from The Circle there's a difference, and so you have to restructure it. Is the reality TV that we see in Survivor a good thing? Well, it certainly makes compelling watching so far, and certainly talking to you, I feel more invigorated to go off and watch episode 4 than I had done.
Good.
If I'd just been left with episode 3 and I hadn't had this conversation, I think it would have gone for me the same way as Love Island went. I was sort of vaguely interested in watching the next episode, but I just couldn't be bothered.
I never watched it either.
Yeah. I love Survivor Borneo. It's maybe my all-time favorite reality TV season, even TV series, period. Like there's a love and an authenticity in that first season, and a what's the right word here? Attention to detail, the love they put into the craft of telling that story that doesn't exist in any other Survivor season ever. So I really am excited that I invigorated you to keep watching.
Well, maybe watch it.
Yeah, watch it from a bigger perspective. Yeah, from a storytelling perspective.
Yeah. I'd be sorry if the storytelling collapsed after series 1. Yeah. It may be going in a different direction, and we may in series 2 or series 3 come back and have another conversation. I hope Karen will endure me for a little bit longer, so that we can say, has it may have changed, but it may be storytelling in a different format.
Yeah.
Because you clearly are still bewitched by it, and so and I'm quite happy to go along with your enthusiasm. I think there's a lot to be said for an emotive response to something. I think we can defend all manner of propositions. My background is theology and philosophy, and in theology, it doesn't really matter which religious tradition you're following. You are generally trying to convince yourself that two irreconcilable things are thoroughly reconcilable. And if you start looking at a bulk of religious traditions and seeing and having respect for each one, again, you're reconciling yourself with impossibilities, and I quite like that. So my bottom line is always an emotive response, and I'm very happy then to pitch an argument, to defend or whatever. It's also one reason why I regret enormously that I never did law, because I love the fact that one day you can be defending something and the next day you can actually be attacking it. Pretty well the same position. And that's what I think I've been trained to do. So the idea that you can put forward an argument and something rests or fails on that argument is, I think, nonsensical. You put forward, you mark your emotional territory like a dog, and then you try to defend that position, I think, because you can always find an argument.
Yeah.
So let's see whether or not there's a new defensible position in Survivor. But certainly I love the storytelling aspect, which I think dips to a serious low in series 3 so far, but I am very happy to see it rise again in series 4 and onwards. I would incidentally really commend you to go and have a look at my series of The Circle, because I think the storytelling in that, which has nothing to do with me, it really is to do with brilliant editing, is phenomenal. And
it is a really good season of reality TV. Very different from Survivor, but I like it.
And Tim, if you stick with Survivor, I think the first season is amazing. I think the first 10 seasons of Survivor are about as good as reality TV could possibly get. It really starts to fade off after
I don't
that.
know how many weeks is the first 10 seasons to go through, Karen?
That's a lot.
Well, I'm saying so it's 14 episodes per season plus the finale. So let's say 14 weeks times 10 seasons. So 100 for 3 years.
Yeah.
3 years. Yeah. You know, we're not exactly going to be dead by that time, I hope.
No. But don't skip any episodes. Don't skip any seasons. You want to watch it, how it progresses.
We can't skip Thailand.
Shut up. Don't log off. Delete your account, Karen. Thailand is better than,
you love Thailand, I assume.
Thailand is better than anything after season 10.
Really?
Yes.
Okay,
It's
well,
different.
we'll wait.
It's different.
Thailand's amazing. But no, okay, this is how I want to get you appreciate Survivor.
Couldn't we shipwreck people in Oxford? That would be so interesting. They'd be out of their
No, what I want to say, Tim, is how you will appreciate Survivor out of anybody else. And this is how I always get new people into this show. The show is not about strategy. The show is not about gameplay. The show is about ethics. So watch the ethics of how people struggle with who they are and what they think they should do versus being judged for it on TV. And then watch how the show presents it, and especially pay attention to the music. There's never been a show with better music cues than Survivor. It's so amazing how well they set this up.
Yeah, they're very open about telling us how we're supposed to feel about certain things.
And who writes the music?
And his name was Russ Landau, and he was amazing. And there was another guy, Vanacore, I forget his name. And the show eventually cut ties with these guys around season 19 or so. And I've never forgiven them because the music was better than the show.
Very interesting.
Yes, but ethics is the key.
I'm always aware of music. Ethics is always the key. You know,
that's the key with season 1 in particular. Ethics will drive the whole story.
But the ethics, I guess, also is only compelling is if you're also, if you like or not even like, but you have interest in the characters.
Exactly. And that's something that I think has been lost over the years. If you don't care about the players, it doesn't matter what they're doing. They might as well be watching chess. Chess is boring. And that's my argument with almost anything after season 20, 25. It's just chess. I couldn't give a rat's ass about these players because the show does not.
I've always thought I should be a really good chess player, and I quite enjoy chess, but I much prefer to lose. And because in the end, I'm more interested in what my opponent is doing. Yeah. Because my opponent is real and the chess game isn't.
Exactly. The game itself is not that interesting, and that's a good analogy for Survivor. I don't think the game itself is that interesting, but the way people react to it is far more interesting. And
I'm fascinated because people assume I'm very interested in chess. I am interested in chess, but to me, chess is rather like a crossword puzzle. It's dull once you've worked out what's going on.
That's Survivor. Same thing.
Yeah, and I think you also touched on something, Mario, that I think also is important. Let me try to think about how
that Thailand is awesome.
Thailand has many great moments. I'm not sure that I'm willing to go so far as to say it's an awesome season.
You know, in the words of the great Ross Geller.
It's a visual joke.
I hope the video people got that.
Yeah. But I think my point is that the reason that 50 million people watch this show, and even now, 7 or 8 million people are watching now, which is astounding when you think about how fractured our entertainment landscape is. Right. When this show started, right, I'm thinking I only had, I don't know, I guess I must have had cable TV by then, but it was not just fractured to the extent that it is now. Like I said, 20 years ago, you could still get 50 million people to watch the finale of this season. But the reason that this show was it wasn't just that people watched, but you talk about the water cooler conversation, right? On Monday, everybody had to, or Friday, I'm sorry, it was on Thursday night. So on Friday, right, everybody had to talk about what they had seen.
Wednesday, it was actually on Wednesday.
What? It was Wednesday first, then Thursday, then back to Wednesday? Mm-hmm. I stand corrected. But in any case, the point is that people were talking about the ethics of the show. But I think but the popularity, it's a combination of both. You have to bring up the big ethical issues, right? But you have to do it with people who are engaging. Mm-hmm. Right? You don't have to love all of them. And again, we talked about this, right? You probably need to have a few that you hate to make this work.
Of course. You need a villain. In the future, Tim, there's seasons without villains. It doesn't work at all. You need some villains just to drive the story.
You always need a villain. Mm-hmm. You always need a villain. Everybody who's written stories knows this.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
look, Karen,
yes, sir.
You're about to do some bookkeeping here. Is it
Yes.
bookkeeping?
Yes, that works.
It is bookkeeping.
Yes. But before I do the bookkeeping, what else did you want to talk about?
Well, it is bookkeeping, because I suddenly realized I don't know how to promote your podcast, this podcast. I don't know where to send people.
Oh, okay. Well, so I have already posted. I'll give you a lesson offline, but basically, yes, I've already posted. I've already posted on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. All you have to do is just repost what I posted. We'll discuss after.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, because no, it's important. I want your fans to understand that you're doing this.
Yes, I want to. I want to, because maybe this is the podcast I should be investing myself in
before you start your own.
Well, he's selling you out, Karen.
I don't see myself as a defector, and anyway, I got 3 years of this one to do.
Well, that's only for the first 10 seasons.
And that's only going to take me up to series 10, isn't it? And I've got to get up to series 40.
Yes.
And that only takes us to the present day.
Yeah.
Right.
You can skip everything after 10.
We're looking at many, 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 many years.
So you don't have any patience anymore, like something like David versus Goliath or some of these newer seasons.
What's David versus Goliath?
This is a much more recent season that I feel like was one of Survivor's best. Generally,
sure?
I do feel like.
You sure you want to get me started on this, Karen?
Maybe not.
No. No, I do not feel the producers are trying anymore, and I feel the audience will accept anything, and so they will shovel crap out because they know they're going to get ratings. That's my short version.
And many seasons, that's probably right. But my point is still, even now, occasionally, I feel like they strike gold.
So it's all metaphorically summed up in that mud bath, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The little fart at the end, the little bubble, bloop. That's what I think of everything currently on Survivor.
Disney worked so hard to get that little bubble in Fantasia. All they had to do is look at episode 3 of Survivor.
Right, and they would have it right there. They could just use that sound effect. They wouldn't even have to make their own.
Absolutely.
All right.
Or they could meet some of my friends.
All right. Now I think I am going to do just a bit of housekeeping before we go. So
housekeeping, not bookkeeping. Housekeeping.
That's right. Well, bookkeeping, yeah, but housekeeping is probably better. So Tim, first of all, we already spoke about this. We're going to teach Tim how to post these episodes so that he can put them on his own Instagram. But why don't you tell people where they can find you on social media?
Oh, on social media, they can find me on in Instagram. They find me under Professor_Tim_Wilson. Mm-hmm. And in Twitter, it's Prof_Tim_Wilson. I don't use Twitter enough. I need to be encouraged by people to use more Twitter, to tweet more. You will retweet again. So I tweeted about the show, and I will tweet again afterward. So then I will teach you then how they call it retweeting. All you have to do is copy what I do. I can redo the Instagram. I'm up there on Instagram, and I think I've got 102,000 followers at the moment, which I feel quite proud of. That it doesn't seem to be, every so often it dips a bit, but it's going back up again, which is quite nice. And then I'm on YouTube, where my numbers seem to be going up as well. So I'm quite pleased with that. And that's under my partner's name. It's called Zontoul Films Limited. That's ZONTUL FILMS LTD, and that's my film company. And I post all manner of things. That I'm just about to start recording episodes of Paradise Lost. You know, the thing with John Milton, with all about Satan. And I'm going to do your guide to Paradise Lost. So if you're in university and you or school and you need to read a bit of Paradise Lost, you will then come to me and listen to me declaiming it with visuals. At the moment, I think it's just going to be lots of fire. Fire, and that we might try the occasional bat wing, but there will be a bit of animation, and there'll be references to all the allusions, because it's a very allusive thing. Have I done them all there? Is that it? But otherwise, you get lots of stuff, sort of how to write a good essay, bits of political comment, bits of Edward Lear, who's my great. Edward Lear's the man who wrote The Owl and the Pussycat, but he was an amazing Victorian artist, and he and I share the same birthday.
Oh,
on the 12th of May.
So which I also missed your birthday.
Yeah, but no, we do. It was a week or two ago. But it was also it's also a birthday I share with Florence Nightingale, who's terribly important.
I don't know who was born on my birthday. I have no idea.
Really? When is your birthday?
April 30th.
No, I have no idea.
So it's not just me.
Sometimes you never know. It's rather like when somebody says, "Oh, I have a friend in England," and you say, "Oh, who is it?" As if you're going to know. And but anyway. But yeah, that's me. I think.
I think you hit all of them. You hit your Twitter.
Sometimes in the street, people start asking me questions, and they ask me my phone number, and I give it, and I think that was foolish. There was a very strange Ukrainian lady who was around King's Cross, which has a reputation. King's Cross has a reputation, so maybe she had a job that should be unmentionable. But she did ask me my phone number. I gave it to her, and then I thought
Oh, you think she might be a Pop-Tart? This is a reference to another podcast that Tim did.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I thought, well, she's not going to get very much luck. But poor dear. She's,
I'm just using your nomenclature, Tim. Pop-Tart is actually an American breakfast pastry.
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well,
but Tim thought that it was something else.
I was like, I thought, tart? Well, I only know two sorts of tarts. One you get out of the oven, and the other one you sort of avoid. But obviously, I don't.
A Pop-Tart is both of those.
Yes.
Well, a Pop-Tart I thought would have been a popular prostitute. And she was popular with me anyway. She asked she took time to talk to me and to ask for my telephone number. Anybody who takes time out to give me time, I'm a sucker for attention.
That's true of most people who decide to go on reality TV, I would say. So Mario, what about you? How can people find all of your stuff?
Oh gosh. My main thing is my website, the Funny115, funny115.com. That is more for hardcore Survivor fans. I don't know if Tim would get much out of that yet, but there's a lot of history of Survivor based in there. It's 345 entries I've written. It's millions of readers. It's like the biggest Survivor website I think there's ever been.
And it's very, very funny.
Yeah, it's quite unhinged and not politically correct. It'll make you laugh. But the one that Tim might be more interested in is my podcast, The Survivor Historians, where we walk through every episode of every season, explain how it was received at the time, why it was received that way at the time, what the fan base was like, what the insider stories were for each season. And we've done that all the way through the first 20 seasons already. You can find that at survivorhistorians.podbean.com. It's also on iTunes. What else? I have my Staff Picks podcast, which is at Underrated and Underloved Movies. Those are the main three things, but that's a lot of work. Those are three things I've spent many, many years putting together.
And you can see my Twitter handle. I'm going to learn how to do this. It's me on Twitter. Karen Talks a Lot. I am fairly new to the Twitter game. I have to admit that I am still spending most of my time on Facebook. So if you want to help me with my truly embarrassing number of Twitter followers, you can come and follow me here. So again, more bookkeeping. So coming up on Survivor NSFW, this Wednesday, we have Johnny will be talking to Marcus Lehman from Gabon, and they will be talking about Gabon and other things on Survivor, as well as Marcus's new show, Labor of Love. Labor of Love is airing on Thursdays, and that is being covered by Zach Hacker and Matt Bischoff, two of the other hosts on Survivor NSFW. Please consider becoming a patron of Survivor NSFW, because if you are just listening to our free feed, you get these shows. Like I said, we get Marcus, we get Matt and Zach on Labor of Love. But there are other shows that you only have access to if you support the show and become a patron of Survivor. So right now on the patreon.com/Survivor NSFW feed, right now we have the Survivor Sequester reunion, where I believe there were 17 people who played the game of Survivor, played a game of Sequester last weekend. If you don't know what Sequester is, it is sometimes online, sometimes not, but it is basically a game in certain ways like a Survivor or like a Big Brother, but a Sequester Mini, which is what this was all played in one very long evening. Last Saturday night, it went on for about 7 hours. Johnny was one of the people who played. And so I also covered the show back on Sunday with Zach Hacker and I, if you want to see any of that. And then coming up soon on the Patreon feed, there will be a Micronesia Micronesia cast reunion, where some less significant of them met up and talked about what happened all back when. Also, I have to do my obligatory plug for the T-shirt. So you can see today. I have to do a better way of doing this. But today I am wearing, yes, so these are all Johnny. So Johnny's T-shirts and Johnny Fairplay have kind of been together since the beginning. And so even before there was Patreon or any of this, Johnny started making T-shirts to support the podcast. And so the one that I was wearing today is the Fire Token shirt. You can find that and many others on www.johnnyfairplay.com. So it's a nice shirt, but not just a nice shirt, that if you buy a shirt, you give them your phone number on the order phone, Johnny Fairplay will call you. It is not a joke. If you do order a shirt, turn your phone on, because you will often hear from him in a very short period of time. And any of questions you might have over anything about his Survivor career, his wrestling career, anything else that he's done, Johnny loves fans. He loves to have an excuse to talk to them. So please consider buying a T-shirt. And I think other than that, I would just say, oh, and I forgot, coming up next week, same bat time, same bat channel, Tim and I are going to be discussing episode 4 with Colin Stone of the Dom and Colin podcast. Yes, so that'll be 4.
How wonderful. Mario, I have a little question.
Mm-hmm.
It's terribly personal. May I ask you a personal question? Yeah, it's to do with your hair. Are you sitting in a breeze?
I'm sitting outside. Yes, I am outside in the Southern California.
Because every so often I notice, I notice your hair moves, and I was thinking it's so exciting that it's not a wig. And
so hair actually does move when you.
It's very lifelike, and every so often I think, because I've got a green screen next door, and I think hair is the hardest thing to do. Because it's sort of
into animation, Which there was one of the Pixar movies that I remember they made a big deal about, that they had changed the way that they drew hair.
It's Monsters Inc. with Sully.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am sitting outside. These are the lovely Santa Ana winds you see blowing my hair around. It's about to get real bad. In about 30 minutes, it'll be unpleasant. So,
but you sound as if you're inside. So your sound system is extremely good.
Yeah, it's I have a big tarp around me. I sit outside, and it's nice in California. You can do that, but I have a tarp here blocking the wind, and that's why you don't see any sun. But it's really nice. It's a nice little setup.
Excellent. There we are. Here I am in the UK, where we're entering the summer, and really it's not that spectacular. But we can at least advance into the garden without being blown off our feet or getting completely soaked. And the cat has been in the garden this morning.
Yeah, I'm sure that they're enjoying it.
She has retreated now back into her basket.
She had enough.
She had enough
attention. Because those who were watching the video podcast were at least able to see him for a bit.
Oh, they're able to. My phone is going again.
All right. That's a signal. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and I am looking forward to seeing you all next week on Survivor NSFW Rewind. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye. Bye.
Bye.